All right, so I can switch that around. We got the mind map. We've got the.
You have to mute yourself on Zoom, please.
Muted on Zoom. All right, we got the reading up, and I've got this other reading if we need it. And
there we go.
hey, I hear you now. All right. I think we're looking good. We got the stream there. And Evo's here.
What's up, Evo?
Hey, Evo.
I forgot that was going to happen.
What was going to happen?
Everything got resized.
Yeah. I know. I hate how Discord does that. I wish there was a way to kind of like keep them the same in that grid pattern and then just fill them in.
That's why we've had to like link up and do the zoom for Doc's screen, because every time Doc cuts to the screen, it resizes everything. So, actually, I'll hold off resizing for now. Do we know if anyone else is going to join or?
Yeah, I think Marcus is going to come, right?
Yeah, Marcus should be here.
So it should just be one more.
Yeah, it just should be one more.
All right. Okay. No worries.
Unless Socrates comes this week.
Is he coming?
I don't know. Haven't heard.
Okay. How's it going, Professor Q? How's it going for everyone?
Good, man. Dude, how awesome was it that the readings actually talked about the survival of the fittest thing? That was awesome. That was so cool.
Right.
Evo's like, oh, just wait.
Really? I thought it was fair. Okay. All right. That's okay.
Look, there's Marcus. How you doing, Marcus?
Not too bad. How are you guys?
Good.
All right.
Pretty good.
Are you awake and up and at 'em, or what's going on?
I think as awake as I'll ever be. No, I'm just always the insomniac, so I always sound like I just woke up. That's kind of how it goes. Got my my natty science mug. It's backwards because of my webcam, but it's just pipette it.
Ooh,
We see you right. I think it's about Discord. It shows you backwards for you, but shows the right way to other everyone.
Oh, okay. So then, cool. That worked as intended.
Yeah, Discord is weird that way.
Yeah.
Bro, I'm sorry.
Don't
though.
understand how or why they do it.
I'm sorry though, but man, if you're doing mobile with those Gilsons, you're a simp, dude. That's the those are the basic bitch type pets, man. Those are the action on them, the thumb action is so like tough compared to other ones. I honestly have no idea why anyone orders those, other than just like not knowing.
I kind of like them, but I'm really weird when I do those kind of stuff. I don't do a lot of molecular stuff, so it's like the harder it is, the better for me, so I can keep control of my thumb moves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you can manipulate the action and to figure out like the exact delivery volume. I understand.
So, Greg, I didn't catch on the stream last time. What's your field? Like, what's your story?
Yeah, man, nice to finally talk to you. Been a fan of you in the chat and stuff. So yeah, I've been I'm a PhD candidate in microbiology right now. I've been doing bench work in lab science for like 13 years now. So worked at a
Work and bench work. I see.
What was that?
I said bench work and bench work. I see your setup.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's true. There you go. And yeah, I worked in an algae biofuels lab for a couple years, and then I did plant biotech for 5 years, and then now I'm doing microbiology with algae again and nanoparticles. So kind of just
Real
all
science.
around. It is, yeah, it's definitely on like cutting edge stuff where you're like, yeah, I hope I can finish my PhD. Like, it's like, you know, it's like, geez, I hope this fucking works one time. Like, so.
How far into it are you?
I have 1 year left. I'm graduating this year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Nice.
That's when my fellowship ends, and that's when I'm leaving. So my PI and I are still. He's trying to wrangle me in, and he wanted me to apply for an additional year of funding, and I'm like, why? I'm leaving. Like, what are you talking about? And he was like, well, you know, I need to, you know, just. He's like, you can apply and get it, and then just say no. You know, just like deny the funding. And I was like, okay. So I applied, but I only applied for 1 quarter. It was like malicious compliance or something. So I got a family, I got like a wife and stuff. I'm not, you know, I can't stay another year just to, you know, for fun, you know, so gotta move on.
Same here. I'm like right now I'm trying to decide if I can go into a postdoc like for another 2 years or something.
Mhm.
But with the family and stuff, it's just, you know, I don't know. It doesn't look like it's feasible.
The pay is so bad, man.
Yeah, it is.
It for
Like,
it's really bad.
It's horrible. And I have really good coding skills and, you know, like data skills. So I can just, you know, put them into action and just make bucks.
Yeah. For real.
Yeah.
It's I mean I liked the biotech, honestly. I mean it's one of those places where you can get into like a small startup and it's pretty fun. You know, it's a lot different than I think people think, and yeah.
No, I kind of agree with you. It's like people think the industry is more toxic than the academia, but I started to think that it's not true because I have friends who went to like industry
Mm-hmm.
and they're happy.
Yeah, yeah. There's research and development sides of industry too. So I was lucky enough to basically be in research and development and stuff. And when it was like I think it was 2014. I was doing genetic engineering of a yeast species, and we were trying to increase the lipid production, and I was doing a bunch of knockouts and stuff like that. And then this new thing came out, like, CRISPR, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And the
Right.
Saccharomyces cerevisiae was the major paper that came out, and I was like, hey, I think we should do this. We should try it. Try working on it. And they said yes. So then, I was working on that. Applying the research, and it was really, really applied, different. Yeah, it was really cool. I think the cool thing about industry, is that it touches a lot more different fields of science. In academia, you're very focused, but you're doing a lot of the different things. You're begging for money, you're presenting your work, you're doing the research, you're doing the background research. In industry, like, the CEO is begging for money. The patent lawyer is writing the patents, all these different things, like, and you're just focused on science. So if you actually like science and you like to work 9 to 5, it's actually really nice, man, to leave your work out there and you just kind of like, peace, it's 5 o'clock, I'm out.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like the management baggage comes with the academia is just like that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It is very odd. It is very odd. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand it myself, but I mean, they're basically like, each lab is kind of like its own startup, but
Yeah.
you don't have any of the structure of a biotech where you have people that are paid to do specific things really well. So why would you fuck with that or mess with that? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, the downside to it is that when it comes time, you don't have any say as to where things go and where they lead and whether you even have a job.
sure.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's happened multiple times for me too. Like, where I was working on robotics and doing genomic DNA extractions, and then they pulled me out and they're like, now you're working on yeast. Now you're doing genetic engineering of the yeast species, and I'm like, cool, awesome. And then literally the PhDs that was their first job, is working at that biotech. They're just in full meltdown mode. They're like, oh my God, all I know is genomic DNA. All I know is plants. Like, that's all I've ever worked with. I can't work with yeast. Like, oh my God. Meanwhile, I'm like planning my first cloning experiment. I'm like, let's go, dude. This is cool. Like, new stuff to do. Like, they're just in full meltdown mode. And I'm like, it's okay, man. I'm like literally giving like mental health advice. Like, it's okay, man. We're going to get through this. Like, just apply what you know from plants to the yeast. Like, we'll be okay.
so Greg, where are you going to school right now?
UC Riverside. I did my
UC
undergrad
Riverside.
in UC San Diego, and then now I'm at UC Riverside.
Another good
Okay. I had a friend who was teaching at Riverside. When was it? It's a while ago. It's a while back. It was more than 15 years ago. He died suddenly. He was an English professor, I think, and died from complications of diabetes or something like that.
Ew.
So
Sorry to hear, man.
it was a sad time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I grew up in Southern California, so Riverside was always kind of like the stepchild kind of thing in Southern California. But I think it's cool. It's allowed me to, like, because UC San Diego, man, it was so intimidating. Like, all these people there, and they're so good at their stuff, and I just felt kind of like a little fish in a big pond kind of thing. And then going to UC Riverside, I don't know what it is, but like, my confidence just completely changed. And maybe it's because it was grad school, maybe because I had a kid or it was more invested or something. But I felt like, dude, I can like go to, like, for example, City Hall and stuff like that, and try to be more involved there and stuff like that. But San Diego's such a big city, it'd like feel intimidating. But here, it's kind of, I feel more like it's accessible and stuff like that. So I've been able to kind of outreach and all that kind of stuff. I feel more feels more.
Sorry,
familiar.
that took longer. Took longer than expected.
All right. Well, should we give you more time next week, Jaxie?
It should be, if it's roughly this amount of people, it should be fine from now on.
Okay.
Just,
All right. So for
OBS is
those
really
of you,
annoying.
for those of you who don't know, we've got a couple minutes before we start. Jaxie is our producer, our new producer for the show. He's running the stream basically. So everything that you're seeing on stream, he's doing. I'm in the background. I've got, Discord open and my mind map open, and I can open the readings and I can watch chat and watch the Discord questions if they come in. So this will free me up to do a little bit more facilitating rather than managing, and hopefully it'll work well. So
Awesome.
I
Welcome,
think,
man. Thank you.
yeah, Jaxie's
No
a
worries.
friend of mine. He lives in Wales, by the way. He's Welsh, and don't give him any shit about the sheep.
It's okay, man. Nobody's perfect. It's all right. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
See, I've got the power to stop or start the stream. Right, so you won't be able to hear me. Basically, my webcam, you're seeing it as Doc's screen. So everything that you see on this screen will go out before it goes out to Twitch. So it's not going to be the case where if you have to look at Doc's screen, there's going to be some sort of time delay. It'll all be as Doc sees it as well. Okay, so I think we're pretty much good. I'll just test the audio for a second. Okay, if you want to just have a little conversation, see if that comes through.
Hello, Jaxie.
Hello.
Hello, Evo.
Hi.
Testing this.
Okay. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Cool.
So I can just start whenever you want.
All right, light it up. All right. It's looking good. All right. Welcome, everybody, to our third session, our third week of the Philosophy of Science seminar. This week stepping into Module 2. So the peer review. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you there in chat. This week will be, let's see, well, for previous weeks, let me just open up my mind map here. First thing, housekeeping. We've got a new producer on board, Jaxie, and Jaxie is working behind the scenes to make our stream run seamlessly, so I don't have to pay attention to that management stuff, but I can focus on the content and the facilitating, which will be very helpful, I think. For those of you in chat and watching the stream, you're certainly more than welcome to ask questions in chat, and we do have a Discord. Let me just bring it over here for you so you can see. The Philosophy of Science Discord, we have a channel called Observer Questions, and you're welcome to post your questions in there as well. In fact, I would prefer questions coming there rather than trying to deal with the myriad questions we get in chat, because actually,
Did the Queen has COVID?
let me I think it's Philosci. All right, so the Philosophy of Science seminar, the Discord for it is the link I just put in there. So you can join that way, and you'll need to wait for a role so I can give you the appropriate permissions, but I'll be doing that as we move along. And what I would ask people to do is, if they are wanting to ask questions, that we try to remain focused on the topic that we're discussing, because the philosophy of science is a wide-ranging discussion that spans centuries, and everybody has a different level of understanding of it. And so, if you're asking questions that we're going to be answering in 3 weeks rather than this week, it can get a little bit, mixed up, and we want to try to keep it focused as much as possible. So if that's something you're able to do, that would be great. And if you put your questions in Discord, you could have a little bit more time to formulate the questions. And if we don't get to them this week, we'll ask them at the beginning of next week, so that we can all catch up and get onto the same page. So that's it for housekeeping. And let's see. So the past couple weeks so far, we've discussed the basic history that goes along with the philosophy of science, and dealing with the logical subjects of deduction and induction. And last week we talked about the problems of using induction for predictability. And over the past couple of weeks, we've discussed the critical role of background assumptions in the formation of scientific theories and hypotheses. So this week, we're going to be moving on. We all know that science can be complicated, but it's become the dominant form of epistemology in our modern world. It's the way we think of understanding. Hey, Fluffy Potato Girl, rating with a party of 9. Welcome in. Thank you for coming into the Philosophy of Science seminar. Welcome, everybody. We're just going through some introductory stuff right here. And please make yourselves at home. Sit back and enjoy our discussion, and you're welcome to participate. Let's see. There's a Philosophy of Science Discord that you are welcome to join. And just give me, just be patient as I assign you a role, so that there is a channel in there for observer questions. So if you have questions that you want to ask the panel, you can do that in the Discord right there. We prefer that you have well-formed and well-thought-out questions that focus on the topics that we're discussing this week. And we're just about to get to what the topic this week is. All right. So we are going to go through and read out a dialogue, which is part of the readings that we've been doing. But this week, before we get to that reading, we're going to be talking about falsificationism and what it is and what problems it is meant to overcome. And this was put forth primarily by Karl Popper in the 20th century. And there's a whole lot of background and baggage that goes along with it. And so falsificationism, if you think you know what it is, excellent. Have those questions ready. If you don't know what it is, even better. Have some questions ready. And with that, we're going to be discussing a lot of things, and we'll get to the discussion in just a bit. But before we do that, what I wanted to do was have the panelists kind of run through the dialogue that has been built into the readings. And to go back to the very beginning of the dialogue so that we can kind of lead you through just kind of a normal everyday Joe's understanding of science as it stands today, but historically situated so the dialogue progresses. Are you guys up for that?
Let's do it.
All right. Who wants to take the role of...
I didn't see a dialogue this week.
That's the very end.
At the very end.
Yeah, it's at the very end. It's on pages
Do the
90 and
reading.
91.
You're out.
I did get a reading. Got it
We
right.
went so far.
Professor.
Busted.
All right. So I guess before we do that, let's have you all introduce yourselves and tell the audience who you are, what you do, where you come from, and where they might be able to find you if you stream and such as that. Let's start out with Evolozzi.
I'm Ivo Lozzi. People call me Ivo. I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I do educational streaming. I talk about generally evolutionary biology, and we spend quite a bit of time every stream answering questions from Reddit evolution, which is kind of fun. And I am very passionate about the environment and climate, those kind of stuff. My research is about that. So yeah, if you want to check my stream out, you can find me with my name, twitch.tv Evolozzi. So that's that.
All right, excellent. And Greg.
Hello, I'm Greg. I have a YouTube channel called The Peer Review. You can go to it by going to www.thepeer.review, and I stream on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. PST, and I'm interested in science communication and just looking at the cool things that are happening in science. I have a background in molecular biology and genetics and nanoparticles. So thank you for having me.
All right, excellent. Marcus.
Hello again. My name's Marcus. My Twitch name is Homozygote, spelled like the animal. Just gonna drop a hi in chat there. I'm a biology streamer in general. I tend to focus right now on COVID, but certainly branching out one with being here in the Philosophy of Science seminar, but as well starting to have panels every Thursday called the Ministry of Science, featuring many of the lovely individuals in here. So like to have discussions about the state of science in general, and particular issues within science and academia, and just talking about what's going on in the world. So thanks again for allowing me to be here, and happy to talk about Pauper today.
All right. And Professor Q.
So I'm a visiting assistant professor of sociology at University of Missouri Columbia. I'm the only one on here who doesn't really stream or do anything yet. And I think they just keep me here as a pet, basically.
Well, you're nice to have around.
Oh, well, I'm a good pet.
Adorable, shall we say. All right. Well, thanks, guys. All right. So let's see. The dialogue. I don't know if you know what pages it's on. The first section is pages 11 through 13. The second one is page 30. The third one is pages 59 through 61, and the fourth one is 90 to 91.
Are we starting from the very beginning?
Yeah, let's start from the very beginning and run through it again. We've read the first couple parts before, but I figured it'd be a good refresher for everybody to catch up to the discussion of Pauper. So who would like to take the role of Thomas, and who would like to take the role of Alice?
Thomas should be definitely Marcus.
All right, let's do it.
Good or bad?
All right. Do we have a volunteer for Thomas?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do Thomas.
And Alice? No.
No, I was Thomas. Who's going to be Alice? I know Professor Q did Alice last time.
I can do Alice. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Right.
So we are starting with the first one, right? Like the page 11.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. And so 1 second after the Big Bang, the temperature of the universe was about 10,000 million degrees, which is about the same as the temperature in the middle of the explosion of the nuclear bomb.
Do you really buy all that stuff, brother? Don't you think it's a bit far-fetched?
Of course I believe it. And I don't think it is any more far-fetched than the fact that this table we are sitting at is almost all empty space, and that is made of atoms, so tiny that millions of them could fit in on the end of a pen.
Exactly. It's just as far fetched, and you're just gullible for believing it.
What? But that is what science tells us, isn't it?
Science doesn't tell us anything. Scientists, people like you, me, they tell us things, and like everybody, they tell us what it's in their interest to tell us.
What do you mean?
Isn't it obvious? Used car dealer will tell you that a car is a lovely little runner with one previous owner because they want you to buy the car. Priests tell you that you got to go to church so you can get into heaven, because otherwise they'd be out of a job. Scientists, they tell us all this techno nonsense, so we'll be amazed at how clever and smart they are, and we keep giving them taxpayer money for research grants.
Come on, now you're being just cynical. Not everyone is out for themselves, you know.
Oh, you're just being naive, anyway. Even supposing that scientists really believe their theories, can't you see science is it's just modern religion?
What do you mean?
Well, if you were living 500 years ago, you believe in angels and saints and Garden of Eden. Science has just replaced religion as the dominant belief system of the West. Right? If you were living in a tribe in the jungle somewhere, you believe in whatever creation myth your tribal elders passed down to you, but you're here, and you're right here right now. So you believe what the experts in our tribe, who are the scientists, tell us.
You can compare religious dogma with myth and science.
Why not?
Like, because, you know, scientists develop and test their beliefs according to the proper methods rather than just accepting what they are told.
Well, you're right to claim they got a method that ensures their theories are accurate, but I don't believe it. Otherwise, they'd all come to the same conclusions, and we know that scientists are arguing with each other, like about whether salt or sugar or alcohol is really bad for you.
Well, it takes time for theories to be proven, but they will find out eventually, right?
Oh, wow, brother, your faith is real astounding, and you claim that science and religion are different. The scientific method's a myth put about by scientists who want us to believe them and their claims. Look at all the drugs that have been tested with this so-called method and pronounced to be safe, but they're withdrawn a few years later when people really find out how dangerous they are.
Yes, but what about all the successful drugs and other amazing things science has done?
It's just trial and error. It's the only scientific method. It's as simple as that. The rest of it is just liberal propaganda.
Damn, I can't believe you. Like, scientific theories like the Big Bang theory are proved by experiments and observations. That is why we ought to believe them, and that is what makes them different than from creation myths and religious beliefs.
So you say. But how can experiments and observations prove a theory to be true?
I suppose I don't really know.
Well, let me know when you found out, brother.
All right, let's advance to page 30.
The little
Continue
ad
the
libs,
dialogue.
Marcus, are so good. You really love the little additions that you're putting in there.
It's so good. It's so
No,
good.
I don't think that they have the readings, so I don't think chat can actually see that Marcus is like adding little things.
Oh, I'm showing it on screen so they can see the dialogue.
Good.
So
Nice.
I like those them liberal scientists.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so good.
good stuff. All right, page 30. Alice.
And so the scientific method consists in unbiased accumulation of observations and inductive inference from them to generalizations about phenomena.
But even if I buy that for claims about metals conducting electricity and the like, which I don't, I still don't see how induction explains how we know about atoms and all that other mumbo jumbo you were going on about before.
I guess it's to do with Bacon's idea about crucial experiments. Someone says that there are atoms, and someone else works out how to do an experiment that ought to go one way if there are atoms, and another way if there are not.
Well, anyway, let's forget about atoms for now and just concentrate on your principle of induction and Bacon's idea about observation without prejudice or preconception. I can already think of a few problems with both of these. For one thing, how do you know that induction is true? And for another, how would you know what to start observing unless you already had an idea of metals and electricity? Observation without any bias is impossible. And you still haven't told me why I should believe in induction in the first place. I reckon that science is just a bunch of Democrat witchcraft and white coats.
Witchcraft and white coats.
Forget the adrenochrome and the ball.
Oh, just wait. We could talk about Comet Ping Pong. Give it a couple seminars.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Let's head on to page 59.
59.
Let me scroll over to that. And here we are. Alice, you start this one off.
Okay. I can't give you a reason to follow the principle of induction, but that doesn't matter because it is impossible to get someone to follow any form of argument if they just refuse to. The fact remains that the vast majority of people think it is perfectly reasonable to base expectations of the future on the past experience.
But that's it? So basically what you're saying to me is that most people just use induction, and those that don't are mad, and you can't reason with them? What makes you think you're sane in the first place?
The thing is, it doesn't really matter either way. Sometimes there's no way of persuading someone who refuses to believe in something that everyone else knows is justified. For example, when someone is in denial about something. But, you know, when people who can admit that they are an alcoholic or that the person they are seeing is cheating on them, when everyone else thinks it is obvious, right? The stupid thing is the skeptic about induction gets proved wrong all the time. Every time they step and gravity pulls them down to the earth.
But lots of the time, you can't predict how the future will be, and the patterns of the past are always broken.
All I'm saying is that the fact that induction can't be justified to someone who doesn't reason that way doesn't mean that those of us who do can't know that it is generally reliable and justifies our scientific knowledge. Take those people who joined the religious cult. That religious cult that thought the world would end in 1999 and all killed themselves at some appointed hour to join a spaceship near that comet.
Oh, mother, that was a beautiful comet, that comet.
It was. And we don't need to think it's anything other than a natural phenomenon to appreciate that, right? Just like we don't need to think that a rainbow is something other than scattering of light waves by their passage through air that has lots to do with small droplets of water suspended in it. A comet is a bundle of frozen ammonia and water with a few other elements thrown in orbit around the sun like the rest of us. It is basically just a rock reflecting light, not a chariot of some god or an alien spacecraft. We know of this because we have theories that have been confirmed by predicting such phenomena in the past.
So you say. But you can't just read off the right theory from what you see.
Well, you can argue all you like, but I'm going to carry on believing the scientists and not the people who tell me that the world will end and that I had better repent. And I give all my money, right? By induction, I know that they are very probably wrong, and the fact that I can convince them doesn't mean that they aren't all off their heads.
I take your point, but look, What I said in the first place was that there's no more to the scientific method than simple trial and error. I'm a working man. I try and learn by my mistakes. So you want to call that induction? Then I agree. I use it. But that doesn't get us any closer to atoms and all that. You haven't told me how you get from the fact that we have to use induction sometimes to believe in all that stuff about the Big Bang. Anyway, I think the point about cultists and people like that is that they aren't prepared to abandon their beliefs in the face of evidence. They just make up some just so story to explain why they got it wrong, carry on regardless. The only thing that's good about science is an attitude of skepticism towards the traditional dogma.
All right. And so let's skip ahead to page 90 and read the last part of the dialogue.
Come on. You can't pretend we never have any positive reason to believe things. I don't know how to justify induction, but sometimes it definitely is justified. Do you really think that I have no reason to believe that the next time I catch a train will be late?
I don't know, brother. Maybe we have to form definite beliefs about things to live our lives, but it doesn't mean it's true.
Well, anyway, science is like everyday life in that respect. If scientists were completely skeptical all the time, they wouldn't get anywhere. Sometimes they need to be committed to a theory, even if it's got a few problems they can't quite see how to solve.
But now I really don't see the difference between science and me believing in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. How can it be okay for scientists to ignore evidence that doesn't suit their prejudices?
Okay, now, if a theory has lots of other evidence in its favor and it works, then it would be crazy to abandon it without something to replace it, right?
Well, it's all a matter of what the competition's like, then what we count as so-called scientific knowledge depends on what we happen to have to compare it with. So the same theory could count as knowledge one day, and then not the next, just because someone invented something better. It's a competition in the free marketplace of ideas, brother.
It doesn't work like that, because usually new theories build on old ones, so the knowledge in the old theory is preserved as science progress.
But not always. What about when there are revolutions in science?
All right. And the revolutions in science is what we'll talk about next week. So this week...
Marcus, you forgot adding common sense to the discussion.
Common sense. All right. So I'm just scrolling back here to the beginning of the chapter. I can never find it. There it is.
It's kind of hard to do that, Eva, when I'm role playing.
I understand.
All right. Well, thank you for that enjoyable rendition. That was a lot of fun. All right. So this week, falsification. So I open it up to you folks, and in terms of just your general impressions of the reading, the readings, because there was a second one there besides this chapter. What did y'all think? What were your what is your reaction to this week's readings before we even get into the details of it?
Yeah, I mean, I generally liked it. I see a lot of where Popper comes from a lot of the time. So, I think there's like, it's kind of refreshing in a way to have sort of that like base explanation for a lot of the things that we, like Eva said, just kind of take for granted as common sense.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to like articulate at least a little bit of, when I have to talk to one of my friends who like loves astrology and like lives their life by zodiac signs and stuff. Like, it's nice to be able to like articulate why I don't do that and why it's a little silly for her to do that. But, generally speaking, I liked it. It was kind of refreshing.
Yeah, I was blown away. Honestly, I've never read Karl Popper before, but I can tell like every paragraph. I can tell like an impact that if something's having an impact on me because I start pacing. And after like every paragraph, I was just pacing and going like, oh my gosh, like it really distilled like so much of what I've been trying to think about and like in my scientific like practice and learning how to think about experiments and stuff like that. Just the idea that you're like making sure that these pitfalls and understanding, you're not falling into those pitfalls. And when you're designing an experiment, that's what controls are. Like this is why controls sometimes outnumber the amount of experimental samples, and people don't understand that. And when you're teaching them how to experimentally design, it's like, I just put it in a tube and I think about if it works or not. And then if it works, and you're like, no, it's not, you can't do that.
Trial and error, my friend. Trial and
Yeah.
error. Yeah. Yeah. What were some of your reactions, Eva?
So I think, like, again, I always have a critical, point of view when I'm reading stuff.
Mhm.
So I think Popper's ideas work well with the natural sciences, I would say. But like I don't know. Like there are problems we will talk about, later today. Like I don't know if it's always applicable. Like which is not. I think. And also, I think that we need to really think about what a social science is, and the criteria we are applying to social sciences doesn't necessarily be like they shouldn't be the same with the criteria we are applying to the natural sciences. That's what I'm trying to say. So I don't know. I think he has, and like his ideas are more applicable to physics than anything. Like it's that it becomes a big problem because like a lot of the stuff he's saying is not really applicable to biology. Like in general sense, I like maybe in mechanistic ways we can apply it to in smaller things. But like if we go to ecology, if we go to like these bigger questions we are trying to explain about biology, I don't think they're applicable. So let's discuss later.
Okay.
All right.
Interesting.
And I saved Chris's Professor Q's reaction for last because I know he had a very strong one.
Oh, not necessarily a strong one, but I loved his. So I know, I know Popper because he got into a debate with my favorite scholar Theodore Adorno from the Frankfurt School, and it was basically a debate over can you do social science like qualitative methods versus quantitative methods, and if so, how can you do it? And so I saw what he was like gearing up for way before I got to that section on different things like like he kind of opens with this idea of where is it, the problem with Marxism and psychoanalysis, and it was like, oh, I see where this is going. Yeah, it was interesting because I think some of the debates that I can see stem from this in different areas, right? So like I see getting the qual-quant divide in sociology, but also within the kind of more qualitative folks that do kind of interview studies and that kind of thing, there's a group that thinks they ought to be doing science, right? Versus another section which has more of a broader kind of lens or is really interested more in applying theory to the social world to see if, how things like racism, for example, take form, rather than like trying to find a new way to talk about racism or a new preciser definition of racism. So anyway, that's just kind of my take. I don't want to monopolize time.
Interesting.
All right. So to inform the audience, this week's discussion focused on falsificationism, which is Karl Popper's big contribution to this discussion on the philosophy of science. And his reason for putting forth this idea of falsificationism as a way of establishing what is science is because he wanted to distinguish science from pseudoscience. All right. And the pseudoscience that he had trouble with was something he had adopted early on in his life and was really enthusiastic about, but then later came to, kind of a skepticism about it. And that was Marxism and psychoanalysis. And so the social sciences more generally. And let's see, the first question we had for this week is, what is Popper's critique of pseudoscience? And why and how does he distinguish it from science? What do you guys think? What is his critique of pseudoscience?
I mean, basically, it's how do you test Marxism, how do you test psychoanalysis, because they're so broad. They're more of a worldview rather than a actual science in the positivist, like here's my theorem, here's my axiom type idea.
Right.
He kind of finds it circular too. Like he says, they come with the conviction about something being true, and then they try to find evidence to support that. So that's another problem he was mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a valid criticism. I've seen a lot of people, this is actually a problem that kind of goes back to the 60s, right? With these kind of individuals who wanted to follow Marx as like religion, rather than cut off the parts that didn't fit or were, not valid.
I thought that this excerpt was really good from the reading. The problem, as far as Popper was concerned, is that it was just too easy to accumulate positive instances which support some theory, especially when the theory is so general it claims that it seems not to rule anything out. I thought that was really salient in being able to test each thing, like make a hypothesis and then test that hypothesis. It's so important.
What page is that, Greg?
66, second paragraph, third sentence down, page 66.
I'm sorry, which pair?
Page 66, second paragraph, third sentence down. The problem as far as Popper was concerned.
And looky there, that's how if I can have Jaxie switch over to the reading, it's one that I highlighted.
Oh, what's up, dude? We sharing PDFs? What's going on? Yeah, I thought it was so good. I mean, there's seriously parts of this where I'm just like, oh my gosh, where it's like, it feels like that puzzle piece, like going in, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like that is such a good point. It's just been, it's really, really, wow. It was, I honestly, it was so impactful, like this reading. It's something that I've been trying to think through for years now, and to actually see it in words, and it was really impactful.
Well, and he mentions horoscopes, obviously, and he talks about them as pseudoscience. And the thing I wanted to point out, though, was that this type of induction, right? Because it is an inductive process. You have a number of observations, and from that, you have it all feeds a certain type of conclusion. But the foundations of those conclusions are kind of the background assumptions and the worldviews that you hold. So, for example, if you're someone who believes in horoscopes, and you go out and you daily read your horoscope in the morning, and then throughout the day you have these interactions that you observe, and they click and they fit into your horoscope, and so you have this confirmatory effect of what's going on, and it reinforces your idea that horoscopes are real. The same is true for my aunts, for example, who are extremely religious. You know, they go to church every single day. They make pilgrimages to various places. They, you know, and everything in their lives, when they see it, is interpreted through the lens of that religion and confirms their belief even more. So it's this natural kind of human process that we're engaged in when we have confirmatory experiences that, you know, make our understanding of the world stronger, right? Even though that underlying theoretical, you know, worldview or foundation is, you know, without foundations itself. It's still a very human thing that we do. So why do you think we needed to break from that with science?
I think finding those patterns is kind of I think it's natural in humans because we're evolved to kind of like in our brains to see patterns out of things. Like we're literally like the reason why we see in the same eye spectrum and stuff is like plants and fruits and all that kind of stuff is because we want to be able to see like tree, bush, tree equals water and recognize that pattern so that we could find water again going forward. So it's kind of natural, you know, to make patterns out of maybe nothing.
Yeah. And so,
right?
Say again?
There's a term for that, apopenia.
Oh,
right, where
interesting.
you basically, yeah. So it's like QAnon took off, which is why I know that there's a psych term for it. But anyway.
Oh, cool. Yeah, look at that. The tendency to perceive a connection or meaningful pattern between unrelated or random things. Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and we do this all the time as humans because it's a natural part of our cognition. It's our way to survive in the world. And it just happens to be now we're situated in very complex social environments where we have some elaborate theories and, you know, a lot of variation of theories from everything from deities to QAnon to, you know, whatever else. And a lot of it just ends up being kind of reinforcing of the same type of idea. Does this happen to scientists as well?
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah,
I think like I would say not just that. Like I think the previous problem we were talking about, like the people trying to they come up with the conclusion and trying to support the thing. It happens to scientists all the time too. It's not it's not like these problems. Like the science today is not free of any of these problems at all. Like with every tool we have, we still have all the problems in the that we had in the past. So, but yeah, for scientists, I think the second one though, like the finding the patterns that are not really there, is not necessarily a bad thing for a scientist to have. Like it might be considered as a skill, because like they might be wrong several times, maybe 99% of the time, but they might be right one time. That will bring a new scientific theory. So it's just following those patterns, trying if they are working or not. Like if as long as they have the proper scientific tools, if they're not falling back on the previous problem where they are trying to find evidence to prove their point, then I think that's all right. But that's my point.
All right.
Yeah, and there's kind of overlap with that. I think I forget how far. I think it was like later on in the reading when they were talking about problems with falsification, but what you just said, Devo, kind of speaks to like the notion that you don't necessarily have a explicit scientific inspiration for trying to carry out doing scientific work all the time. Like sometimes it's divine inspiration or something that you just happen to like I don't know, see in a dream, or like the dude who invented PCR just did a bunch of drugs and then suddenly now we have PCR. Like, you know, you don't necessarily have to be this rigid falsificationist 100% of the time. And I think that like notion of pattern recognition kind of plays into that. Like if you have something that you kind of perceive or pick up on, or something you want to like explore more, you know, ideologically or maybe intellectually is the better word, you can sort of apply falsificationism to it, but not also like operate under the notion like falsificationism's existence precludes you from doing the work in the first place.
Mhm.
Can confess that's definitely happened to me where I've like looked at a data set so long and then I go away and I come back and I'm like, oh, holy shit, there's the missing thing. And yeah, and then it makes everything fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, those connections we make cognitively are sometimes incredibly quixotic, and but when they do happen, it just like you said makes everything fall right into place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it could be just that one little missing piece that you get from a random experience outside of your lab or your, you know, place of thinking, or, you know, whatever it may be. And yeah, and all of a sudden things just kind of fall in line like a bunch of Lego bricks.
I mean, I think,
Happened to me during a peer review process too, by the way.
Peer review, the other layer.
mm-hmm. I mean, I think it happens in the opposite, and too, where, you know, at least when I'm designing like my molecular biology and genetics experiments, like, so for example, if I'm delivering DNA to a chloroplast, you know, one of the pitfalls that I was talking about earlier, like, you know, that DNA could integrate into the nucleus and express the fluorescent protein, and it could, you know, the part of the chloroplast of the plant cell or algae could glow green. It could also be that and it's not, you know, expressed in the chloroplast, but it might look that way. Or maybe the chloroplast is actually emitting in the same wavelengths in the emissions, and it looks like it has that fluorescent protein, but it has that emission wavelength. Or for example, you could have DNA that's not integrated, that's transiently expressed. That's just, you know, that the DNA is just in there, and you have enzymes and proteins binding to it and expressing the protein, and it's not the integrated, you know, DNA that you want. So it's like any of those could be happening that could render the entire experiment false. And that's why there's so many experiments that need to be done, a background knowledge that has to be formed in order to really make sure that you're not falling into those problems.
Yep. All right. So we're going to have to give Jaxie a minute here to rearrange the cameras, since we now have Socrates joining us. Welcome, Socrates.
Thank you.
Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, and
Hi.
who you
Hi.
are and what you do and where they can find you and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm Socrates here at Socrates TV. I'm streaming right now. I love philosophy, discourse. I do science as my day job, but I love philosophy, and so the intersection of those two things, thinking about not just how we do science at a day-to-day level, but what underpins that, why does it work? Not just how does it work, but why does it work, is fascinating to me. So I love this series.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us this week. Let's see. I hope you did the reading. We're going to have a very lively discussion about falsificationism.
Mm-hmm.
And all right. So let's see. Did we answer this question? Why and how does Popper distinguish science from pseudoscience? Did we answer that question?
let them
Why is he
kind of-
making this distinction at all?
Because they can't be
At least if
falsified.
yeah, like that was the notion of falsification was like the solution to that. But at least prior to that, there was the demarcation problem of, you know, how do we distinguish this in the first place? So I guess, you know, the overall framing is that Popper was trying to come up with a solution for that.
Okay. All right. So let's see. All right. So what implications does confirmation have for science? And how did Popper view confirming evidence for scientific theory? So now we're getting into the beginnings of the actual falsificationism. Right? And he starts out by saying that he's critiquing induction and the problem of induction. And, you know, all of these observations we have that seem to be confirmatory don't actually justify our theories, right? Because they're confirmatory, and he's trying to figure out a way to, how should we say, make sense of what it is that we do in science, so that, you know, we're not just continually reinforcing our own ideas, but we have some way to decide whether or not something is scientific, meaning, by extension, true and real. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So he proposes falsification as the solution to that. What is falsification? Tell the audience what you think falsification is and how it works, and then how Popper thinks it works, or both, or however you want to describe it.
The ability for
What
something
was
to be
always-
proven wrong. Sorry, is that just like
I mean,
something,
that
a way to
basically-
show that it's like wrong through experiments, or a way to, but I love highlighting stuff, and I just they're so poignant, these things. Hence, Popper, page 69 top. Hence, Popper came to the view that it is not confirmation but falsification that is at the heart of the scientific method. I think that was so true, because, you know, like going back to my experiments and stuff like that, where it's like, you don't really, I'm not proving that these things, that this protein or something is being made in the chloroplast. I'm saying that it's not being made in the nucleus, that it's not just there already, that it's not, that the protein isn't naturally being made within the chloroplast. I'm proving all these things that are not true, and then therefore, hopefully, we're coming to the conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
This is you guys.
Well, so let me ask a question as a response to that, right? So, actually, someone else go. Let me formulate that question, because it's kind of half-baked at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to add on to what Greg was saying, you know, going back to what when you were saying about this idea of confirmation, the whole, you know, existence, or the reason why Popper was, you know, trying to advocate for falsificationism is because he really thought that science should be attempting to disprove theories rather than simply trying to like confirm our pre-existing biases and what we believe to be true about the world, right? And if we are unable to falsify or prove wrong what we think, then at that point in time, it's the, you know, most salient explanation for what all is going on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, in the example of, you know, either it's raining or it's not raining, that should be pretty easy to falsify, right?
Somewhere you're talking and at what time, and you know, etc. Right?
What? Are you trying to complicate this and say it may or may not be raining when I'm asking you if it is or it isn't? What's going on
Maybe
here?
it's both, right? Schrodinger's cat, right? Maybe it's both.
Maybe it's both. How could it be both? It's either raining or it's not raining.
It depends on how we are asking the question, right? It can be raining somewhere, but it cannot be like might not be raining in another place. So it's like, so I think one thing about this like makes me think that, okay, you know, by a falsification, you know, something like we need to falsify, like looks really, like, you know, it sounds really good, but then you need to account for basically all the alternative hypotheses you have and say, oh, okay, this is a possibility and it's not happening, this is a possibility and it's not happening, this is a possibility and it's not happening. So this is kind of what we are saying, and then we are saying that it's like, oh, like among the best explanations, this is the best we have. Kind of that's where it comes to. But I was kind of confused about like the either it's raining or it's not raining, because either it's raining or it's not raining, let's say outside, just outside of my door, like it's, yeah, that's a statement that is true, but then you know, whether it's raining or it's not raining, it's testable.
So it is raining is a falsifiable statement.
It is,
But-
yeah.
So I could go through these, and I could take my best crack at trying to explain why these are not falsifiable. If that's so, I had the chance to take an intro symbolic logic in undergrad, and either it is raining or it is not raining. In the same way that, you know, physics, when you boil it down to math, suddenly it starts being solvable. Statements like this, when you boil it down to logic, so if you just boil it down to A or not A, and A or not A is, unless I'm misremembering, is a tautology. It's definitionally true by the axioms of logic that we usually apply. So it's not falsifiable that A or not A. That's just defined to be true. God has no cause. It's it would be hard to falsify that. That's it'd be pretty controversial to try to figure out how you could falsify that, and that gets into definitions a lot. Maybe if you define like a young Earth creation God that's like 6,000 years old, something really particular, maybe you could falsify that. All bachelors are unmarried. It's another definition. So you couldn't falsify it because it's just defined that way. There's no evidence that could do that.
All right, let me just put these up on the screen there so people can see what it is we're talking about there.
It is logically possible that space is infinite. That probably is true, but if you did experiments and found out that space or space-time or whatever is not infinite, that wouldn't change whether it's logically possible, which is what the statement is. It's not saying it's true, it's just saying it's logically possible. And human beings have free will. You could probably try to constrain that in some way that you could falsify it, but the way we usually conceive of it, in the very like philosophical, like a libertarian free will matter or something, like there's a lot of different versions. A lot of those would be pretty hard to, or would be impossible to falsify. And at the very least, what kind of comes out of thinking about this is that the philosophy part of science is trying to formulate that question of falsification in a way that you can attack it empirically or theoretically through some kind of scientific method. This is why I believe that science needs philosophy to be able to frame these questions in a way that philosophy can define, in the same way that you need to be able to define physics problems in some kind of mathematical representation that you can really solve it.
Well, from your mouth to Neil deGrasse Tyson's ears. Let's just put it that way. All right. So, all right. So the problem of, I'm going to just read a little bit of the text here just before those examples. The problem of induction arises because no matter how many positive instances of a generalization are observed, it is still possible that the next instance will falsify it. All right. So we go back to the example of all swans are white. Right? We can say all swans are white because every observation we've made of a swan up till now has confirmed that all swans are white. And in order to disprove that, all we need to do is have one observation of a swan that's not white. All right, so, and Popper argued that science is fundamentally about falsifying rather than confirming theories. So he thought that science could proceed without induction because the inference from a falsifying instance to the falsity of a theory is purely deductive. Hence, his scientific method is called falsificationism. All right, so how would you interpret that for the general lay audience and the people that in the future you're going to be talking to who don't know shit about science? And this is a critical point in Popper's kind of delineation of science and falsificationism. How would you explain this to them? How could you put it in lay terms?
Failing is a really important, critical first step in learning.
Unless you're trying to publish.
But I mean, a lot of the first step in any research project or research experiment is likely to be failure. You know, the first experiment is very likely to fail because there's no reproducibility yet. And in everyday life, I mean, this is something that happened to me where like science taught me how important failing is and that it's a necessary part of life and that it happens all the time. And it's that whole axiom. It's not about if you get knocked down, it's if you get back up again. And it can't be more true.
Ain't never going to keep me down.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So how many white swans have you observed, Greg?
I think it's about the endless pursuit of looking at all the swans that you can. Again, sorry, I'm going to be a little quote fairy here, but I love these are so poignant, and it really hit home with me. Like the quote, page 72: "Virtue lies not in caution in avoiding errors, but in ruthless in eliminating them." I don't know about the grammar there, but virtue lies not in caution in avoiding errors, but in ruthless in eliminating them. It's like so amazing. Because it's gonna happen.
Page 72.
Second paragraph, from last sentence. Because it's about not.
Here it is.
It's about not being right all the time. You're not going to be right all the time. There's going to be a point where you're wrong, and it's whether or not your ego wins versus reality. And I hope that, like, in the future, for everything, that I'm humble enough to put my ego in check and realize that I'm wrong in an issue and change my mind.
Yeah, like it's kind of interesting. Some really good practices for preparing for debates are actually things that could probably be applied more often in scientific work, which is that when you're preparing for a debate, you think about what is my opponent going to poke holes in my research. It's going to, or in my arguments, and it's going to be on display to everybody. And I don't want that to happen. I have to put myself the best that I possibly can in the shoes of somebody who's trying to tear what I'm trying to build down to the ground. And if I can do that, and I can demonstrate that those arguments against me, the best possible ones, if I were to imagine that, so I'm trying to prove this thing is true, if I imagine that I'm somebody who hates my guts, and they don't want it to be true, and they want to find every reason they can to show that it's not true, what would satisfy that person that's what I think is kind of at the core of falsification, is that it's only when those people who really don't want it to be true, when they but are at least a little bit reasonable, at the point that those people are satisfied that there aren't obvious glaring errors. And I think this is kind of the core of falsificationism, is that you don't say lots of things add up, so this seems pretty good. You say, I can't figure out anywhere else to poke holes in this. I haven't yet thought of some way that this could be false. Let me keep thinking about ways that this could be false. And the number of times that you fail to falsify it, that you make an honest, good faith effort to try to demonstrate that it's not true, and you fail, that's what succeeding looks like.
I think that's a really good point, Socrates. And I think that how that happens in different types of research inquiry, the idea of falsifying it has different manifestations, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in the coming weeks. But the very simple difference between quantitative and qualitative research methods, in what we're talking about now, it lends itself more to the quantified methodologies, and finding that falsifiable premise and an approach to an experiment so that you could falsify it is much more clear cut. When you're talking about qualitative methods, though, what you're talking about is the researcher themselves as an instrument of falsification, right? And the way that they do it there is they do a lot of self-examination as to what their biases are and how they're getting interjected into the data that they're collecting and they're formulating, and they're presumably going to publish at some point. And so it takes on a very different kind of meaning for the different methodologies. In that one you can experimentalize and falsify, and the other you have to do a lot more self-examination and perhaps have another person check your data. But the key to that is having the same kind of categorical schema for classifying the data. And how that gets falsified is a little bit more tricky.
That's why I always have a co-author with me, and the cost of being a co-author on any paper I write is you have to deal with my stupid nonsense, which is me calling you up for and my buddies the Knicks can attest to this. We get in long drag out fights over the phone, and I think we even got kicked out of a restaurant once because we were being too loud talking about our projects. But especially Nick 1, he is ruthless to me on my stuff, but man, it comes out a much better product in the end, because I can get kind of out there. So anyway, personal note on how I deal with that.
It can feel kind of personal too, if you're not used to it. The peer review process is all about breaking down all your arguments and telling you why you're wrong, and it's really about then making a better argument and making a better product. But I've had people react whoa, this is too much, you need to step back. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I'm trying to tell you what's wrong with your experiment and stuff, and I'm sorry you need this control, and I'm sorry you're going to be doing an experiment for a week that's going to mean nothing unless you do this, but you have to include that control. I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, at the same time, too, like, I mean, if we're talking about peer review for a fleeting second, sometimes it also kind of feels like confirmatory in a sense. Like, I've had reviewers, you know, essentially recommend, you know, conditional upon acceptance, that you almost kind of conform to their biases. Like, I remember one in particular, you know, wanted to have me and our entire research group like rename a particular cell type we were working with that didn't like change anything functionally about our claims. It was just like, we're doing it to like appease them. Like, sometimes peer review feels generally like appeasement and not necessarily, you know, this notion of falsificationism. So it almost seems like, you know, I wish people applied it more consistently. I really like what Socrates said earlier, right? We're trying to basically define success as like the absence of failure, and we're constantly trying to see if something has failed.
Yeah,
but it feels like that doesn't really happen a lot of the time, at least in my personal experience, and I wish it happened more.
You got to love that reviewer that's like, this publication misses all the relevant research on this topic, and then cites the same lab paper, like 4 different papers from the same lab, and you're like, I wonder.
Who's this reviewer?
Yeah, mysterious
Freaking
reviewer.
reviewer too.
It's reviewer number 2.
Yeah, every
Always.
time you're like, I wonder what lab they're in. I wonder what they're trying to say here.
You can always be assured that reviewer number 2 is an asshole, no matter who he is.
It's true.
No matter who it is, they haven't read the paper, and they have their, you know, they wish you'd written another paper, and they wanted you to write their paper, but, you know, such is reviewer 2.
Every time.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I think this paper should have been about this, and these experiments should have been about this. So it's a different paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just say how refreshing it is to know that this is not limited to the social sciences, that this is a hard science issue as well. Like, thank God.
It wasn't you.
yeah.
It wasn't just you.
It wasn't you. Yeah.
I can probably predict that every single one of us has had reviewer 2 review one of our papers,
Yeah, oh yeah.
because I don't know anybody who hasn't had that experience. It's like, and you have to respond. That's the part that I personally don't care for. Is like, you know, it would be nice if I wrote a paper that said, you know, according to reviewer 2, that it should be this and that and the other, but that's not what this paper is. And I have to reiterate what this paper is, even though I wrote it in the abstract, and I wrote it in the introduction, and I wrote it in the conclusion, and for some reason they just missed it.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway.
With
You start to doubt. Is it not obvious? Should I? Should it be in every paragraph?
I get the same thing with interdisciplinary stuff, where it's like, you know, reviewer 1 is saying there's not enough nanotechnology, you know, applications, and like, forget the biology, and then reviewer 2 is like, forget the nanoparticle stuff, get the biology stuff in there, and you're like, I'm just gonna link you guys what you're saying to one another, so the editor can see, and I can get the. I just want the editor to see, like, I'm reading this, and we're going somewhere in the middle.
Yep. That is one of the problems with the interdisciplinary nature of some of our fields, in that it's always going to have this tension between people who want to falsify things and people who want to, you know, confirm it in other ways.
Yeah, because especially you can't address every single pitfall that in 2 different fields at the same time. I feel like you have to think about, you know, going back to the reading, like, what are the important parts? What can really sink this entire hypothesis, and then falsify those in both fields? And you have to be able to have people bouncing back, like, you've missed this entire thing, but you can't address every point, I feel like. And that's kind of like the problem with interdisciplinary research, I feel like.
Right. And you have to do it in 5,000 words or less.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, you know, that's how we're going to advance science.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what you just said too about like reviewers wanting things to be confirmed in other ways. I remember one of my old research advisors ran into that problem on something we were submitting, and he basically just wrote in his response like, "Okay, I agree with you. You do it."
Yeah.
Like, okay, awesome. That sounds like a great idea. get the funding, and I can't wait to see what your results are. Like there comes a point where if you want something to happen, just you have to do it. If you want to keep confirming, all right, cool, but we're gonna like keep falsifying all of these other things over here.
Yeah, and you get stuff that's published, and it's like, man, you have I've seen stuff published. I'm not going to name the publications or something, but they're in premier journals, Cell, Nature, Science, and that kind of stuff. And you're like, they have not looked. They just went through one way, and they completely ignored this entire side of biology. And like, how did this get published? Like, there's so many pitfalls here. We have no idea if this is real or not. And it got published. It's just like, what? It blows my mind that they're not falsifying all these, like whether or not these claims are are true or not. The falsification of this interdisciplinary approach. It's troubling.
Yeah, I think the interdisciplinary approach needs a very different basis for review, and hopefully, by the time we get to the end of the seminar, we'll discover what that is. And since this course comes out of an interdisciplinary program, I'm pretty sure that we'll get there.
Cool.
But I don't know if it'll be very satisfying for a lot of people. Yeah. Because people are stuck here in the Popperian paradigm of falsificationism. And this is only the beginning of the conversation for, the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century.
Right.
And there's still a lot more we need to get to.
Yeah.
But this is how people normally consider science to be structured and to be performed, right? This is how the layman thinks science happens. All right. So let's see. So how else can we steelman falsificationism? What is its real benefits to not only the science, the scientists, the communities at large, the world at large, our philosophies of science? What is the benefits of having falsificationism as one of the tools in our toolbox?
Well, at least for me, like, it's kind of helpful to discern. I mean, I hate using this term, but in the free marketplace of ideas, what ideas are kind of generally worth considering. If somebody's trying to tell me that their zodiac sign said that they were going to do something today, that's really not something I can like test or falsify or prove wrong. So I can just kind of move on and not really give that much thought. But even in a laboratory, if there's some sort of pattern or precognition about a particular topic that a colleague of mine has or I have, I can say, okay, this is interesting. Let's explore this thought. Can I test it? Can I design an experiment around it? Can I make an effort to falsify it and move on if I successfully falsify my idea, right? Because if something continues to not be falsified despite repeated attempts, then there might be something worthwhile to exploring that in terms of spending money and time to like doing experiments in a laboratory. So for me, I think that's like intellectually the value that falsificationism really has is sort of a how do I best spend my brain power? What do I really like think about and consider on a daily basis, and what do I kind of just write off based on this inability to really like falsify it or go after it. And I think that's kind of what Popper was thinking about too in the historical context with Marxism and psychoanalysis. He wants to consider these ideas, and he finds them worthwhile to interact with because they've clearly caught the attention of so many people, but he gets like frustrated, like he can't really take it beyond people to simply confirming what they already think.
Yeah, I think the falsification is kind of the it's the bucket of cold water that you splash on your new burgeoning theory. That's really exciting because there's such a strong human thing that comes to the forefront when you see pieces of information being tied together under one roof, and some some kind of grand thing that explains it all. It's just exciting, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. I can speak for myself. I found that to be very exciting. And falsification is that cold water bath that says, "Hey, okay, hold up a minute. Let's take this from an approach that, you know, it doesn't have that same kind of exciting feel to falsify. To say like, okay, well, I didn't demonstrate that this isn't false." But it's really important for that reason, that it doesn't carry with it the same kind of emotional baggage usually of like, oh wow, I failed to falsify this, therefore it's definitely true. You know, it's easier to approach it in that slightly more, you know, calculated way.
Hmm. I kind of like that, a bath of cold water. That's a good metaphor.
I think like at least, you know, the best thing that can happen is that it was tested and it was tried. You know, even if it fails, it was, at least we have that trial run that we can look at and see what happens and see what fails and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I just read, like, I think it was The Atlantic had this huge like 30-page essay about the communes in Northern California that happened. And it was like people that had Marxist ideals, and then they went and they're like, let's try this stuff. Let's actually see what happens when we actually do this thing. And a lot of them obviously failed, but it's at least that they had that practice that, hey, we tried this and this is what happened. And I wish we could learn more from them. What happened when it was actually applied, and why it didn't succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching somebody yesterday who, I think it was James. He commented that, you know, there's parts of Marx's analyses that are, you know, dead bang on, you know, and probably will persist for a very long time, especially the one concerning, you know, class analysis, mm-hmm. and there being a worker class and a capitalist class. And that will persist for a long time. But the one thing that Marx couldn't anticipate was the development of technology and its scalability, and how that would affect the interaction of classes and the antagonism between classes. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's a lot of stuff there that we can, you know, I think examine. And I think probably should, but where do we get the funding is always the question. All right, so what else in terms of induction would you say that is good? Is, you know?
So, could I offer two critiques of falsificationism? I know you're asking for Steelman. maybe it's not the
yeah, let's see, before we get to that, let's see if there's any other positives that we can offer up for falsificationism. I mean, you guys are pretty smart and you ferreted out things pretty quickly, so I don't know if there is.
We blew the professor's lecture.
Huh?
I said we blew the professor's lecture. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Ivo, what would you say? I know you have something to say.
I'm waiting for the stuff, like, you know, in the criticism. So I have a lot.
Oh man.
So but for like it's a good thing that it brings the claims to a testable space, like space as in mathematical spaces. You know, the claims come to a point that they can be testable, and we can check if like our claims are really, like, you know, they like Okay, I need to stop right now. I'm just going into the criticism right now. Just
All right.
that like diverging there.
All right, so let me take a comment in chat from Xtalk Programmer. Welcome, by the way, Xtalk. Thank you for the follow. They say falsification as a tool allows us to set issues aside temporarily and continue with the part of our research that can be confirmed. Later on, perhaps over a longer time, we may accept that the issue hasn't been falsified and make it an axiom. Perhaps a bit similar to the use of I in math. Any responses to that?
I will go with all the criticisms I have. I have to stop.
I mean, to talking about that comment, like I was fortunate enough to be like at a Nobel laureates seminar, and they were talking about how it was the what was it, the waves of gravity or something like that, and they were it was something that they had postulated 30 years ago in physics and theoretical physics, and it was they were talking about that. And it took 30 years for them to get to the point where they could actually test it, to actually test that hypothesis to see if it was right. And I was thinking about that in terms when I was reading here, because I must have been such an interesting thought process when they were building out these experiments, because they would be like, is it here now? Like, do we have the experiments in order to actually measure those gravitational waves? And they must have been like, no, we can't build this now because of this. We can't build it now because of this pitfall that we will run into. And then eventually, finally, they basically got to the point, and the technology increased to the point where then finally they have like the fiber optics. They have all the ability, the minute detail that they needed in order to actually measure that over a long range and actually measure that the thing that they were looking for. There must have just been an interesting case of falsifying of each step.
Yep.
Yeah, and even earlier, because that was Einstein who his theories predicted gravitational waves. And he's a great example, because general relativity was kind of just obscure, pie in the sky idea until it was confirmed through I think it was like 1919 or 1912 or something. There was an eclipse that his theories uniquely well described that event, and that was the point at which people started to take notice.
All right. So it's that piece, right? The theory that uniquely describes a prediction that gives falsificationism its strength. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I think it has to be to some degree unique. I mean, if something isn't falsified, it's not out of the running, right? If it's false, it's out of the running. It's no longer a viable theory. But if there's lots of theories and they all don't fail, then the race continues.
Yeah, it was like what I was talking about last week, where it's like until you test it, it's just a hypothesis. You have to be able to test your hypothesis in order to see if it's real or not, in order to actually have a theory in science.
Okay, so but we are doing experiments to test things, right? And experiments are conducted and designed, and the experimental methods are also developed by the humans. So and we are limited. So let's say we are testing a hypothesis and finding it false, because like any problem in our experimental design and methods, that's there, but we cannot detect because of the lack of knowledge on that issue. Like there is some part of the knowledge we don't know. Since we don't know, we cannot design it in the experiment because the knowledge doesn't exist for us. And we test it and we find it to be false. It's saying that it's out of the question now is kind of, I don't know. I think it's a bad approach to science.
right? And this,
So we're getting
This-
into the critiques now.
right, this opens up our critiques, right? So let's continue with this. The fact that we have experiments and we have ways to verify or dismiss predictions of a theory through the data that we collect. That's the falsification piece. When we falsify something, do we actually throw it away, the theory or the data? Or what's our reaction to it when that happens? When we come up with a positive falsification, as it were?
The individual level or the community level or
All of the above.
Like I can give you an example of this whole thing, a recent example, right? Like it's the neo-Lamarckianism. So it's like epigenetics and all that stuff we are finding right now is bringing back the Lamarckian ideas to biology, which were completely dismissed for a very long time. And now I'm like going back and reading Lamarck and Darwin again and again, and I'm seeing that it's like Darwin doesn't dismiss Lamarck's ideas, to be honest, and but we do. And then
Right.
like the Lamarckian, what Lamarck says, I think is completely misunderstood in modern biology. Like I think their ideas are a little bit different than what they're saying. The same goes for blending inheritance and Darwin. It just the blending inheritance idea is like Darwin claims that the traits will be the average of their parents, and it's always the average of their parents. Like that means all the traits will be going to a like average trait at the end, but during the time, and all variation will be lost. But does he really mean that? Like I'm trying to get that from my like I'm trying to read Origin again and again. I'm not sure if he really means that. It's quite complicated stuff. Like like he might be meaning something very nuanced, and we are missing it. I think it's same thing with the Lamarckian ideas, and that nuance might be coming from the Victorian English too. Like we kind of read that Victorian English stuff, and we try to like understand what they're saying, but they might be more nuanced than what we're reading right now. So that's these kind of things may started to make me think about, like, if we are bringing back Lamarck, something we completely dismissed for like decades, that maybe there's something more to it than just falsifiability. Like that's what I'm saying.
But
All right.
but through falsification, it's coming back. I mean, we're studying. We're not a Darwinist. We study evolution. It's a theory of evolution. Like it's I wouldn't strictly adhere to anyone's viewpoint. If someone came to me and was like, "I'm a Gregist" or something, I'd be like, "Whoa, dude, you need to chill out. Like step back." But like we say this all the time. Like we follow these people's thinking. It's like I don't give a shit about Darwin now. Like I'm sorry, like I just don't. Like I'm more interested in the application of evolution, like through experiments and seeing what happens. Through genetics and all these other tools that we have. So I feel like it's still being explored, and those ideas can still be explored. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's great that you're reading Origin of Species, and it's an interesting timestamp, but I don't feel like it has any actual adherence to actual evolutionary theory today. Does it? I mean, you know better than me.
So it does lay the ground for like all the selection and all that ideas, and how things are connected with the geology and geography, and like a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that wasn't known was like proposed. The idea of sexual selection comes from that book. It's just that book is even though some science is not really accurate, it's a masterpiece still. Like I really believe that. But I agree with you on that end. My criticism is like, so you are saying the neo-Lamarckianism is coming back through falsification. I kind of like I disagree with that. I think falsification, like going back to our discussions about the creating new knowledge, right? Like, even I claim it to be discovering, or we say it as creating. It doesn't matter at this point. But like creating new knowledge, can we create new knowledge through falsification? That's the other question too. I don't think we are creating new knowledge through falsification.
I guess my point would be like the new theories of. I've never even heard of neo-Lamarckianism, to be honest with you. But if there are new theories, new hypotheses in the theory of evolution, then we test those hypotheses and to see if it encounters and enwraps the larger theory of evolution and how that works.
But where do those hypotheses are coming from?
I mean, I think that they're based off of background research and looking at what the previous experiments and seeing if there's any holes in what we're talking about here. It's like, are there any things that are being pushed through, like a train or something? Are there any chinks in that armor that have been pushed through uncritically, and can we look and tease a way to see through experimental design if we're falling into those pitfalls?
That's complete deduction.
It's falsificationism.
No, like they're creating the new knowledge. If you are gathering all the knowledge that's out there and trying to find the holes, what we are saying is like, this is here, this says this says this, then this is this. Isn't that deduction?
I don't know. I'm not a full. I don't know. I don't know if to say that. I'm not an expert on this. I don't know.
Can go to anyone in the panel too. Like I'm not like this is not back and forth with you. Like just I'm just throwing questions out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you what my advisor told me. And this happened, I think it was in my proposal defense or something. Someone said, well, is this inductive or deductive? He said, what the fuck does it matter? We do both all the time. It's both.
I think the greater point is like, if there's a neo-Lamarckian hypothesis and if it doesn't pan out through experiments, then it's just a hypothesis that needs to be tested, and it's tested and proven true or not, right?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that if we're going to bust out the biology, right? Because it was sort of these two competing notions of, Darwin's natural selection, organisms selected for favorable traits that match environment within population, and then you start seeing those traits and now subsequently, allele frequencies at greater amounts. But Lamarck basically said, you can have an organism that simply adapts immediately to its environment, and then those adaptations are immediately passed down to the offspring. So it's not a, more favorable adaptation is selected for, but rather, unfavorable state is transmogrified to favorable state, which is then inherited. And, contemporaneously, that was a little bit far-fetched. And I think that's generally how it wound up being Darwin's ideas and theory of evolution that wound up being the most parsimonious. It was corroborated. It was unfalsifiable. But like Ivo said at the same time, we didn't back then really have the fullest technological capacity to like truly falsify Lamarck either, right? It was just simply which one was corroborated a little bit more based off of observation. But it's kind of coming back, right? If you talk about the idea of epigenetics, if you do something that changes your ability to adapt to your environment, it might modify your epigenome, and we know those things are inherited by offspring, and this applies to humans as well. This isn't simply just animals. So going back to the sort of the higher order philosophy behind it, this is just the induction problem again, right? We have something that we're generally operating on with Darwin, and most of the time we don't see anything that really runs contrary to it. But then you start introducing epigenetics into the equation, and now you have a possible instance of situational falsification. But that doesn't like invalidate the entirety of everything. It might simply be that there are elements of both Darwin and Lamarck's thought that are more representative of the world around us, and we kind of have to modify our thinking and understanding and our theories to sort of incorporate what we have distinguished. So
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
like falsification, but also we're not falsifying at the same time. Like it's kind of this weird, like Professor Q said, right? We're inducing and deducing simultaneously. That's kind of what Evo's example really feels like.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I would like to mention, though, like, especially within my field, I don't think there's enough falsification that happens. And so you end up with narratives within sociology in particular is what I'm thinking of, that don't necessarily fit, right? Or that are exaggerated or one-sided or partial. And so, for instance, this is a big critique in ethnography that's going around about how all ethnographers are doing is they're just reproducing the same ethnographies, finding the same things, so much so that you have this like genre of being black in an urban area, right? And they all are saying the same things. Not that it's not important, but what about what it's like to be black in rural areas or gay for that matter, like etc. So
Right.
Interesting.
There could
in the
be
sense of falsification.
Interesting.
right. I mean, there could be, especially with the qualitative research like ethnography, it's everybody's still reading a lot of the same literature, a lot of the same stories that are coming out, the same ethnographies, and that has an impact on them as a researcher themselves and what they're going to pay attention to, what they're going to write about. And so it's this kind of cycle of confirmation that leads up to eventually a crisis in the discipline. And it needs to be resolved somehow through probably some revolutionary methods, which we'll discuss next week. But this is, it's part of the practice of science as a social thing, as a social activity among humans that we have to communicate, right? Otherwise, everybody would be coming up with their own freak theories about everything. And so we have to communicate with one another. We have to share knowledge. We have to develop the same type of cognitive schemas that we develop individually, and we also share interculturally. And it's a communication problem on one level, but in terms of the science itself, it's impacted by our practice and the way we do it. And I think that the one thing, and I think that's one of the biggest critiques Popper had of us doing science, is that we can come up with all kinds of confirmations that reinforce our theories all the time. And how do we know if they're quote unquote true or not? How do we know if they're valid? How do we know if we can't come up with a falsified experiment to test them, a falsification experiment to test them? And I think that's his major contribution to the philosophy of science. What you guys were just discussing on page 76 of the text, says the idea that scientists faced with a choice between two seemingly equally good rival theories ought to construct an experimental situation about which hypothesis will predict different outcomes. All right, this is just the sort of thing Popper emphasized. And some people have argued that the standard accounts of Bacon's methodology of the sort that was in chapter 1 misrepresented views and neglect the fact that Bacon anticipated what would later be called hypothetico-deductivism. This is the name given to the popular view that science is fundamentally about thinking up hypotheses and deducing consequences from them, which can then be used to test the theory by experiment. And then they go into a discussion about Newton's theory of gravity and this other theory preferred by those following Rene Descartes and such. It leads us into the next part of it. According to the account of falsificationism, scientific theories are tested as follows. Scientists deduce a prediction from a hypothesis. Then, if observation is not consistent with the prediction, when the relevant experiment is performed, the hypothesis is falsified. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they give a little syllogism there on page 77. This entails that T entails E, where E is something that can be decided by observation. Not E says that E is false. Not T says that T is false. For example, suppose T is the theory that all metals expand on heating. E is the statement that a particular sample of copper expands on heating. Clearly, T entails E, and so if E is false, then T is false. The argument above is deductively valid.
Mm-hmm.
However, in reality, it is never possible to deduce any statement about what will be observed from a single hypothesis alone. Rather, hypotheses have to be conjoined with other assumptions about background conditions, the reliability of measurements, the initial conditions of a system, and so on, which is all of the things that y'all have been discussing, basically.
I mean, it has to mean something that you can test a hypothesis, right? You have two hypotheses, one's tested, one's not. I mean, it has to mean something to be able to test something.
Well, but let's go back to Darwin and Lamarck. What if you only have the technological capacity to test one and not the other?
Also, what you're testing is also an interesting one, right? Like if you go back to the example of swans, like you let's say we the claim is all swans are white, and you're testing that. It's like that's an endless testing like procedure. Where do you say, okay, this is enough with testing, we consider this to be true? Where do we say that? It's like that's like all those boundaries are kind of arbitrary, aren't they?
I mean, they're arbitrary, but at the same time, I think it requires an open-mindedness to be, I guess, perceptively aware of any instances that might, create a need to resume the testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If, there happens to be, let's go back to the swan example, right? If we've done observation for months, maybe even years, and we've only found white swans, but maybe if there's a corroborated report from authoritative sources that there might have been a black swan sighting, well, okay, maybe now we can resume that procedure of trying to figure out if we happen to find a black swan, and that's a very rudimentary example, but it's an arbitrary boundary as to when we stop testing and when we sort of what we decide is enough testing collectively, and that goes back to consensus. But I think there also needs to be that open-mindedness to resume testing if there's good reason to do so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that I have a question here. I'm sorry to cut you, Buena. This follows like this. Okay, if this is like we say, okay, there is an observation of black swan, so we can resume to testing. So how is this different than the search for the Bigfoot?
You're treading into my territory.
I know.
I mean, in theory, it's like they're in.
Well, you're not trying to falsify anything with Bigfoot, though.
Well, you can
Right,
though.
so
You
maybe-
can test whether or not there's enough nutrients in that environment in order to support a mammal of that size that needs, because we know how much food that they would have to eat, and we know how much it's something that you can measure.
Well, I think I would take a different tack. I appreciate, using other types of information to either support or attack that, Bigfoot theory. And what I would say is that in terms of, all right, the swan example, we can look at empirical data and say every swan we've ever found is white. And so saying that all swans are white is, at least contingently, until we find a counterexample, a fair thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we can't say that there are no black swans, right? Even though all our experience up till now has been only observing white swans. It would be a mistake to say there are no black swans, given the evidence that we have. It's okay to say that all swans are white, because implied in that is the, contingent upon our finding some counterexample, we're going to assume all swans are white. But if we put forth an assertion that there are no black swans, that's a very positive assertion that can be falsified with that one counterexample, right? So we want to be careful what claims we're making and how we're making them, right? Because we don't want to confuse the issue with saying that there are no black swans, because we may very well find one in the future, and it's just so happened that we did in Australia, in the 19th century.
This kind of makes me really confused. Like, I might be confused on this end. When I think about, like, if we make a claim like all swans are white, I'm not sure if it's a falsifiable statement.
Mm-hmm.
I might be confused. Like, I totally take it on myself. I don't know if it's really falsifiable because of the way we are saying it. It's like all swans are white. It's not falsifiable because to say that all swans are white, we have to test all swans.
Right. And
we cannot do that, so it's not falsifiable.
But we don't need to test all swans.
But then we cannot say all swans are white.
Yeah.
Like I might be completely confused. I don't know.
So we might have to test all swans. We might only have to test one swan, right? So if we say all swans are white and the first one we examine is pink, then we would falsify it immediately. But if we line up all the swans in a row and go swan by swan, and the first, I don't know how many swans there are in on Earth or in the universe, but the first 50,000 of them are white, and maybe the 50,001st is a pink swan. Then we would have to test that many. So I guess there's an upper bound, I guess, of the number of swans.
Yeah, well, and that's what Eva was saying too. Like, that upper bound is whatever we decide the upper bound should be.
Whatever it takes to get to the 0.05 level. That's all we need.
I think the Talk Programmer has a really interesting point too, and it gets back to what we were talking about last week, where it's like cryptic species, where it might just look like the swans are white. They could be completely different colors that we're just not able to perceive right now yet, and like some technological advancement might show us that okay, they're completely different. Like, for example, the cryptic species that look exactly the same, but they're different species because they mate with one another within the subgroups, and they're completely separate. So I think having the idea is the whole point of falsificationism isn't to make these definitive statements. It's to be saying, hey, we could be wrong, and the virtue lies not in avoiding errors, but and eliminating them. Just trying to look at what we can and eliminate the possibilities and be open to being wrong. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good approach. I mean, generally that sort of builds up to, you know, what hasn't been falsified yet being, you know, what's generally accepted. But like you said, it requires also the desire to, should it become pertinent, to continue to attempt to falsify, you know, current consensus, right?
Exactly.
Once something's consensus, it doesn't mean it's static and it's there forever.
So therefore,
Right.
the problem.
We just have to have good reason to set up experiments to try and falsify it again.
Exactly. And the problem with the all swans are white problem would be not saying that. It's saying all swans are white. I'm not going to look at another swan. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look at another swan.
Exactly.
It's like, well, now you're not being true.
Yep. And I think that in some ways, Talk Programmer is right in that it does become a bit of a language game. And this is something we all engage with as scientists, even though we may not acknowledge it, right? And we have certain ways of phrasing things that couch things that, you know, just, you know, blur the boundaries a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that follows, I mean, it's one of the things that we do, but it's very connected to the way we think as well.
Yeah.
Right. And certainly in part of our training as scientists, we've been taught to, you know, never be 100% declarative of anything, you know, be more probabilistic,
Exactly.
you know, these types of things. And it comes through in our language. And so as scientists, we need to be careful as to what we're saying. It's like, yeah, all swans are white because every instance up till now we've observed of swans, they're white, you know, and there's that little kind of caveat there up until now.
Exactly.
And, you know, we could also say that there are no black swans that we've observed ever. So maybe there aren't any. But going more than maybe there aren't any seems a bit over the line.
Agreed. Since we're talking about problems with falsificationism and they specifically talk about the hypothesis of natural selection, I really want Evo's opinion. I'm really interested in. So this is the quote for people that haven't. Pop off, King. Let's hear it. You're holding back, Evo. I want you. Let's hear it, dude. Come on. So here you go. Here's the quote for people. Page 85. They're talking about the reasons why falsificationism might be wrong, and they say the hypothesis of natural selection. So, quote, most philosophers of biology would argue that the real content of evolutionary theory lies not in the phrase, quote, the fittest survive, end quote, but in the idea of organisms passing on characteristics subject to mutation and variation, which either increase or decrease the chances of their offspring surviving long enough to reproduce themselves and so pass on those characteristics. So I'm interested in your thought on that statement.
No, I don't disagree with this statement. It's the so like the my criticism is about the thinking that, you know, Popper has about the like, you know, he thinks the fittest survives, and then, you know, this is not testable. Like if it was the case, yes, it wouldn't be testable. But then, like if you think about like some of the like the theory of evolution by itself, like, you know, the theory of evolution is not testable. Like it's a bag of everything. You cannot test this. You have to break it apart to like smaller pieces. Then it starts to become testable and, like, you know, falsifiable. So you like it's the same with the theory of gravity. You know, it's a bag. You can put a lot of things in there, and then the things you can test will make the theory of gravity like do I like, am I clear on this? It's like,
Yeah, well,
like-
I mean, it goes back to the induction idea again. Like you're deducing
Yeah.
in very small proportions and then stacking all of those deductions together to collectively induce. And the theory of evolution is a very large and encompassing, selection
Yeah.
of deductive observations that have been made. Yeah, I mean, you're right, but that's just that dichotomy again.
yeah, and the pieces change all the time. The pieces can change anytime. That's the thing. Like, so what we know is when I just stand, I can stand on Earth. I don't fly, right? There is something holding me on this Earth. That is the gravity. So like, let's say all of our science was false, and we were hold on Earth by some godly force.
Intelligent
And, like,
falling.
that is intelligent falling, right? Due to the intelligent falling, it would still be the theory of gravity, but it would be explained by intelligent falling. So I like the theory of evolution is a big thing that encompasses a lot of things. You can fill it with many things. What we know is things change. Like we know things are changing. How is the question? And to answer that question with how, we need to test many simple things. As Marcus was saying, comes to that dichotomy. Yeah.
Reminds me of when I was losing my religion and I was still going to church. The pastor was like, no, that God could still work through evolution. That could be his mechanism, And it's like,
Well,
how would you
argument
know?
I've made to Jehovah's Witnesses that I've talked to. That it's like, well, I mean, he said he made all this stuff, but maybe he didn't do it just like pop. Maybe it was something that preceded. Isn't that cool? It kind of winds it up and it goes on its own.
But I guess I think that the theory of evolution, but by breaking it up, and so I guess the theory is like a car, right? And we can take off each part of that car and we can test it and to see how it is. I just, it feels like each of those parts being able to be taken off and tested individually and then reconstructing the car is important. And it's even if it's we're all in a simulation, man, that car is still there and that part is still there and that engineering is still making that car. And I feel like that's still more impactful than I don't know, Da Vinci's helicopters or something like that, where it's he didn't actually build it. It was cool and it's an interesting thing, and maybe it even works, but it's not like a physical car that I can drive. That means something.
No, I agree with you. It's the breaking into parts definitely makes sense, but it's the fact that let's say this overarching theories, right? The theory of gravity. I don't think theory of gravity is testable. It's not something falsifiable, because I fall every time I just every time I leave myself, I will fall. It's just gonna happen.
So then is it science if we can't test it?
But here's the thing: we can test how the things are falling, right? We can design an experiment how things are falling. That will be the that will make the laws of gravity and all that stuff, and it will lead to this whole ideas of the masses and stuff. They are testable, and they are those are the things that are falsifiable. The theory of evolution right now explains how the things work in nature as they are, right? It explains so many things
Yeah.
that I cannot falsify it. It's not, but overarching theory is not falsifiable. But Yeah,
I
go,
think,
go on.
I think this is important. I'm sure this must have come up somewhere earlier in the seminar, but just as a definition or a description or a philosophical understanding of what is a theory, what is a scientific theory, because my conception, and people may have different conceptions of what is a theory, but my conception of theory is that it's something that creates almost a narrative or a model around a set of facts that allows us to both make predictions, but also have a kind of like human understanding of the world that is something that we can put in our mind, because we can't really just contain a huge set of disparate facts and act on them. Humans are, in my experience, humans aren't really set up that way. We need some kind of coalesced model. And the phrase that I like that my one of my professors in undergrad used to say is that models aren't true. Some models are useful, and some models are more useful than others. And so a theory isn't true or false, or I guess it could be so false to the extent that it's really not useful. But really what we're talking about is usefulness. A model is useful or not useful or more useful than another model. And so when we think about from that perspective, I feel like that makes a lot of sense of this kind of topic.
It kind of gets to the
Let me expand on
Go
that
ahead.
too. Like when you're talking about the usefulness of a theory or an idea, even if it's not something we have the explicit capacity to set up an experiment to falsify, that doesn't mean that any like idea about gravity or any of the observations we've made in a very deductive sense about gravity like invalidate the entire utility of gravitational theory. And this kind of goes to one of the criticisms of falsification as point number 5, that sometimes we just collectively decide to ignore whether or not we can necessarily falsify something in the first place, because it doesn't do us any good collectively, scientifically, to just toss something out the window like gravity because we can't falsify it. Like there's so much utility to gravity that it would harm thought and scientific endeavor to discard it entirely, rather than sort of operate under the assumptions and deductions that we've made and wait for a future ability for us to actually maybe go ahead and test that out. I mean, we could bring it back to biology too. We haven't had the ability to really fully test Lamarckian ideas about inheritance, and now that we have the sequencing revolution of the 2000s, we have the ability to start probing around in the genetic code, and maybe some of Lamarck's ideas now have a bunch more credence behind them based off of deductive observations we've made in the genome. So all of that I think speaks to the capacity that we shouldn't like embroil ourselves constantly in this sort of like Popperian mindset of I'm going to be a debate lord and falsify everything like that. That's not necessarily how this should go, right? You can apply it in some context, but I think we have to be very judicious in when we decide to try and apply the notion of falsification in the first place.
Yeah, I also think that there's this issue like about falsification and how we are setting up our theories and how we are testing them. Let's go back to like the realm of the theoretical physics and what's going on with the particle physics area, right? So if you think about the whole thing on that end, theoretical physics says that okay, you should look for this, that it's there, and the particle physicists go and try to find that, and they're not trying to falsify. Actually, they're looking for the evidence to find those particles. So are they really trying to falsify it? That's a question I have. Like they have reason to believe that particle is there, like these pentaquarks and stuff, let's say 5 quark particles, like they have reason to believe they are there, but they haven't observed, and there is no evidence before. Like they have reason to believe from the math. but they have no evidence that they exist, but they still look for it. So where does that fall? I don't know.
Well, they're looking for the outcome of a prediction of a theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get into theory a lot deeper next week with Thomas Kuhn, but it's not I wouldn't say it's an example of falsification, but it is an inquiry into the predictive ability of a theory.
That's true.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a good theory, it should be able to predict quite a few things, right? And just to kind of circle back to what Socrates started talking about in terms of theory and what it is, and I kind of like the car metaphor that you brought up, Greg, as representative of a theory, in that it has a number of parts, right, and a number of assertions that it makes, and it is a model of sorts. And basically what it is an explanatory framework that allows us to take all of the data that we've accumulated so far and make sense of it in a consistent way through this particular theory. And so theories essentially, I mean, this is a very big simplification of it, but theories are stories, right? And humans are storytellers of various kinds. We're storytellers here, right? We're all engaging in storytelling, telling stories about, how we've encountered, falsification in our own sciences and our own research, how we've dealt with induction and induction, and we can tell stories through scientific theories. We can tell them through statistics. We can tell them through art. We can tell them through paintings. We tell stories all the time. In fact, the only way we really learn in a significant or impactful way is through stories. It allows us to take all of these disparate facts and join them together in a cohesive way that makes sense of all of them.
To a human brain, to a human
One
understanding.
of the things that we'll discover, is, and we're talking about part of it today. What if we do run into the situation where, we falsified a theory through this one experiment, or these 5 or 10 experiments? We've come up with, contradictory data that doesn't fit within the theory. What do we do? Right? This is going to be the subject of next week's, Kuhn topic and scientific revolutions. But it's that type of idea that a theory is a story that takes all of the data that we have available to us and makes the most sense of it, right? Incorporates all of it, doesn't leave anything out. And we just, accumulate more data. If it fits with the theory, it was like, oh, good data, let's keep it, keep going. And falsification is a way to kind of slice off some of that detritus of things that shouldn't be part of the theory. Right? And so,
I guess
see.
I'm really tepid about using the word theory there. Like in your theoretical to the particle physicist, like I would still say that would be a hypothesis that hasn't been tested, and it's kind of like a blueprint to that car. Like you haven't developed that car, and it could be that like that car when they try to make it doesn't have a floorboard. You're like, oh damn, wasn't in the blueprints, man. You gotta
Right.
change your hypothesis, to put that floorboard in there.
Right. I think a good example of this might be something like quantum physics versus string theory,
Okay.
right? Where string theory is an entire theory, has predictions and everything else, but it's nothing that we can test at all. Right? We just don't have the technological or human intelligence capacity to devise those tests and see whether or not this theory is true. We can do it with quantum physics, which is why that has now become, or become again the preferred theory. String theory was a hot thing for a while, but we can't test it. We can't. It's essentially metaphysics, right? It's still a theory, but we just can't test it. I mean, you might call it a hypothesis, but it's a little bit more complex, I would say, than a hypothesis.
But why would we give like deference to theoretical physics and give them the ability to do a theoretical hypothetical experiment and then endow that with the idea of a theory when it hasn't been tested, it hasn't been able to shown to be wrong and have been formulated over time and getting better over time. It just seems weird to have this special, like, oh, okay, in biology, in order to have a theory, you have to test it and you have to show it and you have to reproduce it. That's one of the big things about science. How can you have a hypothesis that you've never tested before and have it be reproducible?
Well, the theory itself explains all of the things that quantum physics also explains, but in a more elegant fashion, a more, using kind of an Occam's razor type of thing, a more simplistic, get rid of all of the extra stuff type of way. And that's why it was kind of put forth as a theory and not just a hypothesis, I think.
It just doesn't feel right to me. I don't know. It just doesn't like. When would that like work in any other thing, in any other place in our world? Like, if you have a carpenter and you're like, oh, I actually don't touch wood. It gives me splinters. I don't touch wood, but I'm a carpenter though. And you're like, what, dude? Like, I'm sorry, you're not a carpenter. Or like you can draw the blueprint of like whatever chair you want. That's cool, but you're not a carpenter. It just feels weird to me to have these like little things. Like, in political science is the same way, where it's like, it feels like we've given some people the ability to and go straight to the conclusion and okay, that's the best way to do it, and we're not going to test it, and it's like, it doesn't seem right.
I agree.
Well, yeah, that would be my next question. Like, how is this different than the social sciences we are trying to separate from? Like, like according to Popper, we definitely should separate the social sciences from natural sciences because they're definitely not testable. Like they're like they will fail and all that stuff, right? Like that's basically what he is kind of saying. Like from what I understood. Like I like Q, I agree with you, right? Like
I know.
Yeah, I agree with you. So it's like the like that. How is it different than that, right? Like it's like also okay. Let's say like what is our like standard for testing too? Like what is the testing standard? Like where does it start? Where does it end? Like I kind of I'm throwing out these questions, but I don't have answers to these questions myself. Like, not that I have a like clear understanding of how to do this the best way at all. I'm full of questions. That's my criticism, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I think that kind of speaks to just the intrinsic like difficulty in what we're doing, right? Not every question we can posit necessarily has an answer. Like, if you want to bring back the standard of testing, that's going to be relative to a field or even relative to a particular question. Like, it's going to have to be something that's talked about and generally agreed upon. And a lot of the times, that kind of mentality has a higher order manifestation when we talk about theory, right? Like, we can generally agree upon something's predictive ability or usefulness to us and operate under those conditions until we have good reason to no longer operate under those conditions, right? I mean, it kind of goes back to what Greg is saying, this very iterative approach of trying to improve upon things until we have the most like fully fleshed out and explanatory and predictive idea or theory that we can have for a particular question or issue or field. So I mean, it really speaks to the difficulty, I think, even for like people who aren't doing like literal bench science in a lot of cases like we are, or even people doing social science, right? Which it's valid, but I think even social science has it like really harder than we do in a lot of ways, right? Because we can point to biology, like, these cells in a petri dish, or look at this mouse do something after we vaccinated it. Like, we can point to very like tangible entities, but social science has it very difficult in a lot of ways. It goes back to that qualitative versus quantitative issue, right? Like, we're trying to apply scientific thinking to something where we don't even have like a tangible thing to point to as like a piece of evidence or a theory or an idea. Like, this is all just abstraction. So
I think it's even worse. So with physics, there's at least a pretty fair assumption that you can make is that nothing about our understanding of physics will change physics. Maybe that's not true. Maybe there's something we can learn about physics that would actually change the way physics work. Who knows? For the most part, at least until pretty recently, probably, our understanding of like biology, understanding biology isn't, to some degree, it will change biology, right? Because as our ancestors understood more about animals, they were able to do animal husbandry and domesticate animals in different ways, so they were able to change biology, but at least it's a relatively slow process. When it comes to psychology, how do you do a study now on psychopathy or something, where you go to classic thing, whenever you go to a college campus or a city square and you ask people about it, a level of understanding that's now permeated society means that people understand maybe what the questions are asking, and they respond to it with that theory, I guess, that story, that model in their mind. And now their responses and their relation to that is changed. Or when people go into therapy or something, and now there's a million TV shows about therapy, and now people are acquainted with their therapy and know what it is. So that loop, when it comes to human experience or human understanding about human experience, it's so tight that it's constantly shifting the goalposts of what it is in a way that is different from other disciplines. It seems really hard. I come from a physics background where it's like, we don't have a big problem about, stats, because there's just like a bajillion particles. We'll get more particles. It's fine. We don't have to worry about N usually. Biology, the systems are so complex, and the emergent behavior is just unbelievable. And then, as you get to deeper levels of psychology and that, it just, those layers of complexity build up so quickly.
So I'm gonna shit on theoretical physicists and back up Professor Q right now. Here we go.
It doesn't happen enough.
Right.
So I mean, it's like one of those things where I genuinely feel like, at least in sociology, they can reproduce the experiment. Even if it's only 30% reproducible, let's say, because of the reproducibility crisis and stuff, let's give them that. Like string theory and quantum physics and all that kind of stuff, this hypothetical physics stuff, prove to me that it's not just dark matter. That's 85% of the universe, according to you guys. And now you're giving out these hard theories that you think that are provable and tested.
Energy too.
Yeah. So like, prove to me, falsify it. That's this week. Tell me that it's not just dark energy and dark matter.
Well, if you want some confidence, I mean because that's really all anybody's selling is it's a confidence game, right?
Mhm.
Give us your confidence, we invest, we discover something. The wackiest part of cosmology to me is inflation, because it sounds like the most like bullshit thing, that it's like, well, the numbers don't really work out. Maybe the universe expanded like a bajillion times faster than the speed of light for like a bajillionth of a second, and that pretty much fixes things. And there's been experimental confirmation of it. It's like the most like bullshit hedge fixed duct tape on a theory that I could kind of imagine, and it's been experimentally validated to some degree. I mean, but that kind of thing does happen. What those numbers line up really, really well. That you have the let me see if I can find it, but the cosmic microwave background chart, and it's like here's the theory, here's the experiment, error bars shown, and they just look like points. It's like one of the most kind of beautiful reproduced plots that I've ever seen.
But it's reproduced, and that's exactly my point, and that's good. That's awesome. That's like, now we're going from a hypothesis to a theory, but instead, like, maybe it's just I'm like mad about the theoretical physicists getting all these documentary like telling me that there's 13 realities that now like that exist. It's like, dude, what in the world? Like, come on. I guess I'm just a biologist and I'm just like an ape brain kind of thing, but it's just, I don't know. It's just really frustrating.
You think maybe they feel smug about being able to say something that sounds like bullshit and being totally serious about it?
Something like that. I mean,
that's true to some extent.
Greg, don't worry. We have those kind of stuff in biology all the time.
Like what? Like what? What's the? I mean, what's the example?
Like, think about the jumping genes.
Okay, transposons. We're taking out transposons now.
Oh god.
Yeah, they sound like, when I first heard about the transposons, I was like, this sounds like bullshit. How does that happen? But it happens. It's just they just jump, like, go from, like, they just replicate themselves within the genome, and their numbers increase and all that stuff. It's kind of wild. It's a wild thing that happens, right?
Yeah.
So like we have stuff that people can, like, I think for physicists, like, it's they are learning about those kind of things, and they think, oh, this just completely makes sense. So that, like, I can say this a little bit because I have a minor in physics. So like, I've been in that realm for a little bit. Like, and for us biologists, like, we learn about things that are completely wild to the imagination, but then we are like, this is it's just normal. I see it all the time. Like, I actually, I've never seen a jumping gene because I cannot see a jumping gene, but like, we detect it from our analyses of, like, let's say PV to PCR, and we see the elongation in the DNA, and we can say, oh, that's happening apparently. Yeah.
Horizontal gene transfer. Come on, sounds like bullshit.
I would say the most like far-fetched, kind of like grandiose idea that's kind of like almost getting in this level is maybe Dawkins' selfish gene theory. That's kind of like getting into that realm of like, is it the genes that are driving all this kind of thing? Like, am I just here because my genes are telling me to be here, kind of thing?
So I hate Dawkins, but I love that theory.
Okay, cool.
I think it explains. I think it has a good explanatory power. And when we think about that theory, that then you can account for, like, the prions, you can account for the viruses and everything that encompasses around us. So, it's kind of, it has a very like high explanatory power. That's why I kind of, I like it. Yeah.
This may make you mad, but I don't really know if in sociology we ever, like, have exactly hypotheses in the same way. Because, like, when we write up our research, yeah, there's research questions, but they're never what you start, like, at least in my experience, it's never what I sat out for. So there's a lot of like the way the sausage is made is very messy. So just throw that out there.
And great to go back to when you were bringing up, theoretical physics and, dark matter and all of this into the equation. Like, that's something we're working on continuing to test right now. We just sent that like massive son of a bitching telescope into space. That was like decades and decades of work to even like construct in the first place to, give us some insight into, the origins of the universe and, see if we can detect some light from, the very beginnings of, the universe and time itself. Like, we're getting to the point, technologically speaking, where, hey, we might have a greater capacity to test these things. But that,
I agree.
We've been operating under these assumptions for a long time now in the absence of said James Webb telescope, because we had the Hubble. And then I think we were still in some capacity, operating on some of these things without the Hubble. Like, we can still have these things be very useful and predictive to us, and that kind of leads to the notion of developing better instrumentation to continue to corroborate or maybe find an instance of some piece of data that might falsify our current idea, right? It goes back to that constant notion of trying to figure things out. So it might, again, like it's all abstraction, but at the same time, like, it doesn't mean it's useless. It just might, as like to us as biologists, right? It might just sound like a bunch of, gobbledygook that somebody just like smoked a bunch of pot and was like, "Yo, dog, like the universe is made of dark matter. Isn't that wild?" Like, it doesn't matter even if they smoked pot or not. It's got explanatory and predictive power. Like, it's so foreign to us, right? Because that's not our specialty.
Yeah.
So I've been sitting here thinking the whole time about this in a kind of different way. And I was thinking about, like, gosh, this may get me canceled off this program, but like
exciting.
Critical race theory, right?
Oh.
Like, it's a theory, it's an idea, right?
Yeah.
And like I'm sitting here thinking about, like, does anybody really test that? Like, do they like there's definitely research articles and great publications where people apply it, right, to our understanding based on data, etc. But does anybody try to falsify it? And actually, I could see where that could get you in some really hot water politically in sociology if you went down that road. It would be something I would never do until I had tenure. I'll tell you that much.
Well, that says something, right? Like, the fact that you're not willing to go down that road to try and falsify something until you have enough like backing or a backstop behind you to put you in a position where you can do that. I think that kind of reflects what Buenavuen was saying earlier, that we're all, or a lot of people within our sort of academic circles, tend to be stuck in this Popperian notion of, it is what it is because it's been falsified a million times. And like Evo was saying, when do we stop testing? And it seems like a lot of people have just decided to like accept things as the way they are and stop testing in some cases. And that one might be one of yours, Professor Q.
Well, and just so folks know, I'm not dismissing critical race theory in any way. I think it's perfectly fine. I teach it in my classes. But yeah, it was just something that I was like, ooh, that's spicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can continue to expand upon it and gather new understanding that only continues to corroborate things like critical race theory. But that's a whole separate discussion about how that's now a bad word or something.
But we have to study it, and we have to study how it's changing over time if we're going to institute legislation in order to try to fix the systemic problems that it's going and talking to. And I think, in defense of my physics colleagues, I actually think that there's a huge need to spend billions of dollars on these experiments, literally, and I actually think that these huge science experiments that are needed, like CERN and all that kind of stuff, it kind of calls into question, for me personally and my political ideology, like, how libertarian could you possibly go if we're all gonna need to come together and donate billions and billions of dollars in order to figure out these questions that I don't think that you could do as like individual states. As we'd have to come together and look into these questions to see and test these hypotheses ultimately, if we're gonna see if they're falsified or not.
Well, I mean, CERN is just it's like a big underground tunnel, right? So maybe Elon Musk could build something.
Forest had a new tunnel.
Seize the Hyperloop. Let's go.
Add that.
You know?
You're driving on the Hyperloop. What the hell was that, dude? Was that
Oh, there's the boson.
Yeah.
The Higgs boson. Disappeared.
yeah, dude. I got. Oh my god, the Higgs boson traffic today. Oh, it was awesome.
Yeah, I think Houston is the best place to build that. Just
Yeah, this is the long con. We let Elon do what he wants and then just seize the Hyperloop for higher purposes.
Yeah.
I think.
All right.
Just one comment about. I mean, so this common notion of science is like hypothesis and testing hypothesis. That's one thing that we do. That's one thing I do. But I feel like 90% of what I'm doing is more kind of exploration. I get some data set, I examine it, I look for things that might be issues in it, I look for things that might be novel, and then there's like very specific pieces where I have like, and it might be like, this thing that I'm seeing is real. That's my hypothesis. Or it's not real, whatever. Either way, you can set it up either way. And then it's like, okay, how do I validate that this is real or not real? But that step of forming a hypothesis often comes pretty late into the game. The hypothesis might be, we'll find something interesting if we gather this data set. But,
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's like when I was developing the hypotheses for my experiment, I was looking at like what's out there, and then what we are observing, and then I was like, okay, look, this is known, this is a big thing that might be affecting this, but nobody has tested this. Like how is that possible? So let's do this. It was the idea. So in the exploration, it's like to come to hypotheses. It's a lot of deductions you have to make, and a lot of inductions too. You have to go through all this, like the thought process of exploring what's out there, looking at the data and seeing like, oh, this is happening, but there is this doesn't look right. Like there might be something happening here. That finding those and then trying to apply those to things, and then like there are completely crazy stuff I developed over my PhD. I was like, okay, we do this and do this. How about doing this? But it's completely crazy idea. Like like are there like previous stuff? Yes, but not really. Like nobody has tested in that thing at all, but we try to do that. So those kind of things, I don't know. Like are they like? Do I come up with do I try to come up with something falsifiable in the beginning? No, I'm just trying to come up with a crazy idea that I will develop into something falsifiable later on. I don't know.
That's the cool thing about research is that you in answering one question you get 10 more. And I think that's
true.
That's the idea of like actually putting your hypothesis to a test too, because you're thinking about the methods and then you're thinking about the shortcomings of those methods you're going to use, and you're like, damn, dude, if I had RNA-seq on this right here, I could like figure out so much more about what's going on. And I can't do that because we don't have the research money in order to do that. But damn, that's a cool experiment. And then you put that in the discussion, and that's a further experiment. But it's only my point is the only application and the going through the methods that you're able to see that shortcomings that you're not able to explore. If you were just keeping it at the hypothesis step, then it's like, I'm right. I don't have anything. I know exactly what the RNA-seq would look like, but
Hey, just trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. All my experiments are going great.
Yep. The call of thousands of con men throughout the ages. All right, so I wanted to mention a couple things. There at one point y'all were talking about Dawkins' theory, the selfish gene. And I wondered if anybody had been able to view, or have you viewed Robert Sapolsky's lectures on behavioral biology? All right, because in the first couple lectures, he points out to his class of undergraduate students is that you have this theory of the selfish gene. You have this second theory of kin selection. You have this third theory of whatever it is. And it's not a question of, do each of these theories need to compete against one another to explain what we see in terms of behavior rooted in biology, but rather it's a combination of all of these things that, when taken together, can offer you a reasonable explanation of what it is that you're seeing. So the point being is that certain theories have certain applicability in certain contexts. And if you modify the context just slightly, or if it's a combination of, a couple different contexts, you may need more and different theories to help explain what it is that you're seeing. And this happens not only in biology, but certainly in the social sciences. And it's never a choice between, it's never a choice of selecting a single theory that explains it all, right? It's always a combination of things. And I do this when I talk about ethics. People have this idea about ethics, and that, you have to decide on one particular ethical framework, and you have to it's a competition to define which one is right, right? Is utilitarianism right, or is deontology right, as an example. And my response is that it's never that simple. And we, as humans, not only employ both of those throughout our day and in daily decision making, but we employ a virtue ethics theory, we employ a feminist and care ethics, we employ environmental ethics, we employ, a lot, most people don't even understand what information ethics is, but we do that as well. And we move between them seamlessly. So that there's no, in order to understand our ethics from, a personal standpoint, we need to incorporate all of those theoretical frames in order to be able to understand how it is that we act ethically. So the same, I think, would apply in any scientific endeavor, whether it be biology or sociology or whatever else. There's never a single theory that will explain it all. And it behooves us to consider multiple theories and multiple perspectives, no matter where we are in the scientific endeavor. What do you think about that? Chris is like,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's really easy, especially with political science and stuff. It's easy to kind of fall into that trap of thinking about it. I think about political ideology or philosophy, trying to build a house, right? Where you're trying to build a house, but we're not going to build one house for the entire country necessarily. It's like everyone has to think of their own houses. They have to try to build that on themselves by themselves. And the problem is sometimes people try to copy the blueprints of another person's house, and it just doesn't make any sense, and it's incomplete. And this is why I think it's so interesting that the movement of building that house from blueprint to actually building the house is so important. For example, the Marxists that did those the communes in Northern California, there's Marxists that call themselves Marxists today, but those people call themselves Marxists too. Like, are they both Marxists? Is that the same thing? It can't be. It can't be the fact that someone's actually trying to practice a commune and trying to do that hard work and trying to make that is the same as someone that's read some books and has a theory of a hypothetical worldview and a hypothesis on how something comes through. It's just not the same to me. I can't square that.
Well, it's a really interesting thing with something like a political theory, because that goes back to that loop of what does it mean for it to be true? What does it mean for a theory? So what does it mean for Marxism to be an accurate critique of the ruling ideology of the time? Is that critique, or is that worldview still useful or accurate or meaningful if 100% of people had suddenly a Marxist viewpoint? Because it itself is a critique of another ideology. And so what does it mean for a political ideology when more or fewer people now adopt it? It almost feels like I did one project on microbial metabolism and the interaction between different like microbes and the way that they almost kind of outsource their own metabolism. So they, metabolize sucrose a little bit and then, output something, and then some other microbe uptakes it, and then they produce something else, and they all kind of do that cooperatively. Sometimes they grow faster with more, so they actually they should compete and use resources and take them away from each other, but sometimes they actually grow faster when they have each other. So maybe there's some kind of political ecology that there needs to be some balance of Marxists and capitalists and libertarians and anarcho-monarchists and everything. I mean, who knows?
Socrates, I'm very against this kind of approach. So it's like, here's the thing. When we are talking about these ecological things that we are observing in nature, we should use them very carefully, and like in applying to human societies and stuff. They're not really translatable, and that non-translatability causes a lot of problems. I had to chase away a person yesterday on my stream again. Like, they were trying to make comments about like things that are not really translatable, and it's like, it's not how biology works. And like, do you want me to teach all evolution to tell you that it's not how it doesn't work? It will not happen like in a 2-hour stream or 5-hour stream, whatever. It's like, that's those things can be used very, very carefully. Like, I observe, like, if we can make a direct observation of an animal behavior that we can apply to humans, we can say, oh, there's this animal behavior I'm seeing in, let's say, baboons, and I see the same thing in humans. Okay, that's it. Like if there is a social structure we are observing in some animal groups and we are seeing that in humans, but it should be very translatable. It cannot be like, oh, there's this like microbial commune that they are helping each other, so let's apply this to political ideologies in human society. That is very far-fetched. So, and it's very dangerous. Like, scientifically, it's dangerous, if you ask me.
Sure.
So
I wouldn't say that we should do that because microbes sometimes do this. I think my broader point was just that it's complicated, and as you change those proportions and the way they interact, those relations themselves change.
That's true.
All right. I love this conversation because it's taken us directly to the place where we need to go. Right. And it all kind of hinges right now on the phrase you used, Ivo, the untranslatability of it. Right. And next week, when we talk about Kuhn's theoretical approach, the word incommensurability arises, which is a new word, and he gave impetus to the use of paradigms, and what that means, and how that has become a very commonly understood word that we use nowadays. And so I'm loving this conversation because it's leading us directly where we need to go. But before we get there, we've got like 15 minutes left in our seminar here. And I just wanted to ask if anybody read the second reading that we had for today, and it was actually Popper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Science, Conjectures, and Refutations. And if anybody has thoughts to share about it and critiques of it or whatever, let's open it up for the next 10 minutes or so to examine this reading and what Sir Karl Popper had to actually say himself.
So I have a big critique about the like his critique on the Adlerian explanations of two different cases, like you using like similar explanations but coming to different conclusions. I think that was just a bad take. I like it just decreases the value of the reading for me by a lot. I'll be honest on that. Like it's just
Yeah.
so
Let's hear it.
the first there's this person in the first case pushes a child to the river to kill, and in the other person, or like in the second case, a person just jumps in the water and just saves the kid, and the explanations are, oh, they suffered so much in their past, and now like one of them is committing a crime, but in the other one, the other person is saving the kid because they suffered so much. So this is like, first of all, this is not how any kind of scientific. I don't believe any social theory works like this too. It's like these are completely different cases with completely different people, and possibly even if they are saying, oh, their backgrounds are similar, completely different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I was like, what the fuck? This is not an example you use.
Yeah.
It's like it's not how you try to make like conclusions about social science not being science. You're just missing the point of social science here. Like you're trying to come up with a hypothetical example, and you just fucked it up. I'm sorry. Like that was my critique. Like I really was like, oh boy, no. And then the thing he says about like, oh, all the Marxist like history is refuted. I'm like, okay, so like when we are like about talking about like the social theories, like you can't make that claim because first of all, it is not fully tested, and social theories can change as the scientific theories, and it's just that's like these ideas he's bringing about the social theories are so wrong. Like I'm not saying anything about like, you know, how science, like the falsifiability and everything. I think those are valid, but the points he's bringing about social sciences is like I think to me Popper doesn't understand. Like
Right. He's reducing them to simply inductive logic and inductive practice. And that's a very limiting way to see them.
Yeah, he's simplifying the social sciences to the point that they are not social sciences anymore.
Positivist social science.
Exactly.
Yeah, I tried to find that note actually where he talked about that was refuted, and I tried to pull up his book. I could only find the first volume, and apparently it's the 15th chapter of his book that he was talking about. So I'm actually really curious, like why he thought that was real, or what he was citing as evidence there.
And he's citing himself as evidence. That's late.
Well, it was like one of his author notes where his author notes are extensive, so on each of his things. So it might have been multiple pages, like an essay or something.
Which book are you referring to, Greg?
It was
The Logic of Scientific Discovery, his big one?
Open Society and
Open
its
Society.
enemies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Open Society and Its Enemies, okay.
Yeah, I'd love to read that.
Um,
I'd really love to read what he was talking about.
I don't know if I have a copy of that, but
It's very
I'll look
lengthy.
for it.
So
So I kind of read it just a little differently, maybe than most people. I kind of read it as he was like kind of trying to troll everyone. And like to me, what he was trying to do, or like what his argument at the end of this was that our theories stem from our ideas, right? That then drives the research that then, you know, better informs the theory, right? And you know, voila. And I thought what he was trying to do, and again, I'd have to look at the timeline in social sciences, but he might have been trying to argue against what he saw as a coming menace in social science, you know, the dreaded Marxism, right? I don't know. Maybe you have some insight into that, Dr. Buenbuen.
I don't have any particular insight into that, although I do have somebody who's getting Open Society and Its Enemies, and he'll dump it into our Discord.
awesome.
And
Perfect.
we'll let you know when that happens. Yeah, the insistence that Popper has is that he wants to make sure that things that aren't scientific aren't considered to be scientific. The problem is that he has a very narrow and rigid idea of what is scientific. And for him, it all comes down to, you know, this aversion to induction and relying upon falsificationism to tell you whether something is, you know, accurate or meaningful or not. And that is a problem because he's single sourcing, you know, the entire way of deciding what is scientific and what is not. It just doesn't work for me. But I'm an interdisciplinarian, so I come from a completely different, you know, set of assumptions and backgrounds that are multifaceted and multidimensional, and you know, they don't always line up, and there are contradictions all over the place. And then you toss in all the philosophy stuff, and it's a big, convoluted mess.
I mean, I kind of understand what he's saying in that it's like, you know, I feel one of my frustrations right now with political discourse and talking to people, it's like we talk too much about our utopias, and I think it's really important actually to have that establishment. Like, what are you working for? You know what I mean? Like, if your answer is like, I don't know, it's going to be a nightmare hellscape, and I'm just going to be chilling, you know, by myself. It's like, well, okay, maybe we need to step back from the brink there, you know. But like maybe we can establish our utopia viewpoint of what we would like the world, or, you know, everything to be like, and then like, okay, so then what's next? It can't just be in my viewpoint that's the house, right? That's the whole house that you're building, the blueprint of your house. But it could be that, like, when you have that really nice, like, damn, dude, that's a really nice mansion that you got there. That's sick. That's a cool pool. Like, I like that. And then you build that house. It's like, oh, the house just crumbled like within the first day, and you know, you go out to view your political ideology's house, and the architect was like, yeah, you were a freaking dumbass, dude. You didn't have any structure on the bottom at all, no structure pillars at all, and the whole thing just collapsed in on itself. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, you know, you can talk esoteric and be on like that fourth level, third level of the house, but like, dude, if your foundation and none of this is even gonna work, then like what are we talking about, you know? And it's and I feel like it's the problem of people dealing with this utopian viewpoint where it's like, you know, this isn't the right house I'm going to work for. I'm not even going to work for the house because it's not the right blueprint that I think that society is going to be at. And it's like, dude, we need to get a shelter going. We're not even at the house stage. Like get a shelter going so we can get like a tent or something. And then people laugh at it and it's like, oh, look at this tent boy. This guy's like, oh, he's got a tent. It's like, dude, at least he's got a tent, man. You know, like you got to do the work. You got to get involved. It's great that people have this idea of what it is, but you got to get involved. You got to start changing some stuff.
Yeah, kind of a off the wall anecdote. The house that I live in, when my parents built it in 1969, and we moved in 1970, and they had a blueprint, and they had a contractor who was also a friend of the family, and somehow he constructed the house entirely backwards from the blueprint, and nobody can figure out how he did it. But that, you know, that's the house we're living in now. Anyway.
I think it's really important. I really do. I really feel like it's I want to see people's houses that they built, and because it might be completely different than what that they're thinking about, and that's what we learn from actually doing. We learn from actually trying to put hammer to nail to board and trying to actually make something rather than just like these blueprints. Because sometimes, you know, people, you know, they're hypocritical, to be frank, like, you know, the ability that they live or what they espouse is different than what their blueprint is. And it's kind of like that matters. That has to matter, right?
Right. Yeah. So maybe what I'll do is I'll end on a little bit of a speech that I try to give every so often, especially here on Twitch, where you have such contentious interactions sometimes. And maybe this is just the wisdom that comes with age, because y'all can see that I'm very old. But it actually it's going to end up closer to where we're going to end the seminar on. And it's that, you know, each person has built up their own experiences through their lives and come to their own understandings of things through their lives, whether they be influenced by someone else or whether they've developed these conclusions on their own. Everybody develops their own wisdom in their own time. And when you have people coming together who've come up with very different versions of reality and what that means, you can't find and you have trouble finding common ground to kind of work out whatever differences you have. One of the things I recommend is that people think about themselves and think about how they understand the world, and think about that world as a conceptual landscape. And imagine that you're in your mind and you're walking in your mind through an entire geography of your experience. And as part of this experience, there's a horizon beyond which you can't see, you don't understand, you don't know, right? And that no matter where you are in your conceptual landscape, there is a horizon, right? There's things that you just simply don't know. And if you can walk through your conceptual landscape with someone else and explain to them, you know, how this came to be, how this feature came to be, what this feature means, what that concept is, and do all of that, and also do the same for them. Walk with them through their own conceptual landscape and figure out how they came to the understandings and knowledge that they did and where their horizons are. When you do that with someone else, what you're doing is you're fusing the horizons of each of your conceptual landscapes, which automatically expands it.
Mm-hmm.
Your world becomes bigger, and the horizon becomes further away from you. And there's probably lots more that you still don't know, but now with this interaction with someone else, there's a lot more that you do know. And so when you come into situations where you're confronting people that it's argumentative and there's no common ground that you can find, and it's, this, whether it be like debate lord, tactics or any type of interaction like that, if you can take those steps to walk through that conceptual landscape with each other, your horizons will expand. You will end up being a better person for it because you simply have more of an understanding of the world around you. And so I think that's where I want to leave it tonight, because we're gonna fall into that very discussion next week in discussing Kuhn and scientific revolutions.
My favorite
All right.
guy, by the way.
Yeah, Kuhn is awesome. Not as based as Feyerabend, though.
Oh, damn.
All right. So with that, final words from everybody. Evo, go.
Oh, this was some reading. Like I had to go back and read and get a little bit enraged with the fact that how we think about like how to do science and how we want this science to be inclusive. But then the way we are thinking is not really extremely inclusive. We are just excluding a lot of things from being science, whereas they can be science by their own methods and stuff. So that was an interesting thing, and I think the Popperian like thinking is like the dominant thinking in scientific field right now, which I found to be a little bit troubling for myself. So I like that's my final word for today.
All right. And Greg.
Oh man. I really think I agree with the idea that you have a hypothesis and you have to test that hypothesis. You have to try to go out there and you have a view of what's going to happen and you have to have a view of your background, but then you really are given that chance of when you apply your thinking, apply that hypothesis, it gives you that moment to fail. And I think that is so important. And if you fail at something personally, or if your experiment fails and stuff, it gives you an ability to retune your approach and try it again and try it again. You have to learn from the past and reapply a new method going forward. And you can do that continuously through a lot of different ways, but it's that pursuit of getting better and iterative approach rather than thinking about this is the best way, because there's shadows, there's false pitfalls that you find in practice that you could never have a thought that exists before.
Excellent. All right. Marcus.
Yeah, I guess my final thought will kind of be additive on top of that. I agree with Evo in the sense that this sort of Karl Popperian approach in modern science is predominant, and I think it almost functions as a double-edged sword in some cases. The first edge is to like cut the wheat from the chaff, right? To really whittle down what ideas are worth considering and designing experiments around to falsify, and use those findings to sort of incorporate them into our greater understanding of how things work. But it can often lead us to be very, I think, rigid in our thinking, and to sort of prematurely discard things that may be, may have evidence supporting them in the future. If we develop new instrumentation, or if we, in the process of doing something, discover some new concept that gives light or credence to some idea that we previously discarded, that might have been innovation or advancement in thought that we lost because we were too rigid in applying Karl Popper's notions of falsifiability. So I guess my final thought would be that, like Greg said, it does have value in our hypothesis testing framework, but if we prematurely exclude things from being tested in the first place because we've demarcated them as pseudoscience, or they're not necessarily immediately falsifiable, we're ultimately going to be worse off for it. So I think we just need to be very judicious again in how we apply Karl Popper's frameworks.
All right, and Professor Q.
So it's interesting. Evo is like looking at myself in the past when I was just first reading Popper as a young grad student. Like, it pissed me off. I hated it. And now I'm reading it. I took a little different approach, and I was like, what can I pull from this that might be insightful? And that's kind of cool. But big thing I came from is, just don't get too locked into orthodox Marxism or Freudianism, or else you're just as good as an astrologer.
Professor Q, would you say it's the survival of the fittest ideas? Sorry.
You'll find tomorrow or next week, science is a political endeavor. So.
All right.
I'm holding myself here.
All right, and Socrates, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're just saying. There's some ideas can thrive, but they're thriving because they're parasitical, and they won't survive as a dominant idea within a society, but they will thrive very well within a society that's otherwise thriving. I think when it comes to the scientific approach, I think there's a lot of new discovery that requires a high level of imagination and creativity, and seeing things that only you can see because only you as a researcher have tuned yourself as a human instrument to see them. And then your next task is to thread that line of making it so other people can see them, but also being very, very careful not to corrupt people into being deluded in a way that you might be, and to try to get your emotions and your love and your loyalty for your new scientific discoveries that you think you're seeing, to try to throw that cold water bath on sometimes and see if you still see it. But it can start with an incredible level of imagination, of imagining what you're seeing, that it's not quite so cut and dry, quite so clear, but it to some degree it needs to end up there.
All right, well, that'll do it for this week's seminar. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for contributing. This has been a great discussion this week. I hope everybody in the audience has enjoyed it as well. Once again, reminder, you can all join the Philosophy Science Discord. The command should be in chat. And next week, we'll be continuing our discussion with Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions. And he has a very concise and direct challenge to Popperian notions of science. And I guarantee it'll be another very interesting discussion. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you all for being here. And I think we're going to close. Let's see. Should we raid out to anybody? Anybody have any recommendations as to where to raid? I'm not even going to look. I'm just going to take your recommendations.
I don't know. All my people I follow are conspiracy people, so I don't know.
Me too! Professor Q! Me too, dude. Oh, man.
I mean, Maddie's streaming right now, but it's debate panel stuff, so that's up to you.
Matty Cakes?
Yeah,
We could do Matty Cakes.
there's an underscore at the end, just as a heads up.
Matty Cakes underscore.
Yeah, Riverboat Jack is also a good one, too.
Yep. Yep, I didn't see Riverboat Jack until I pressed the button. Maybe next week. All right. We're out of here. Have fun, everybody.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Alrighty, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. It's been fun. Cool. Well, that went fun. That was awesome. Does this work? Oh, it doesn't work. Let's see if this works. I don't know how to save this. Yeah, my camera doesn't work after having the Discord. My video is locked to my Discord panel. Alrighty. Well, Titan, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it. I'm gonna stop streaming now. So have a good day. Thanks for coming. Wednesday at 9 p.m. I'm gonna stream. So if you wanted to join then, that'd be awesome.